So just let me know if you're here and things are working. Board Member Earl.
I'm here. Good morning.
Good morning. Board Member Hanson.
Present and accounted for.
Okay, good. Board Member Cannon.
Good morning, I'm here.
Oh my goodness, look at you guys. And then Board Member Marsh.
Here and accounted for.
Okay, I'm so glad. And as I said before, if any of you are in your pajamas or just lolling in bed, you are forgiven completely. I think we're okay with staff. You guys look like you're magically always ready to go. Nora Lee, you're good? Okay. Well, so good morning, everyone. I hope you got some sleep. And before we start this meeting, if you recall, I'm sure you do, last month we had a request for a math poem. And since you didn't know that Standards and Assessment is also a micro-credential for a poetry class, this poem is going to be dedicated to our very own Deputy Superintendent of Student Achievement, Patty Norman. And I have to tell you, I was going to write a math poem just made completely of numbers, but I just didn't feel like it last night at midnight. So here is the poem by Marvin Solomon. And I'm sure, Patty, you are best friends with Marvin. I'll try to emphasize the math words. So here I go. It's called Math. We are the sum of everything and everyone we've ever known or ever will become. We are subtracted from air landscape ideas of swirling integers, the plus of minus. We subdivide to quotients of emotion, love, the arithmetic of skin and motive, proving that we live. We multiply to one last courage, one last fear, from calculus and algebras of heretofore to there. We are the trig of arcs and angles, slides and planes, worldwide and personal, that walk us upright where we've lain. Backwards, forwards, sideways, whatever the amount, we deduce from laconic posit of instruct. We count. The end. And with that, I believe Deputy Superintendent of Student Achievement, Patty Norman, wants to say a few words to us this morning.
I am so impressed. And you knew how to say laconic. That just really, that's marvelous.
Well, I do have to say, I know that's a
to...
little bit Englishy of me, but I couldn't help it. And Patty, we're having a little trouble seeing you and hearing you.
Okay, is that better? Okay. All right. I just wanted to say thank you so much. Poem is lovely. Thanks for including math. You know that is my love. My personal love is mathematics. I also wanted to say thank you to the board for last night. I know that it was a long night, but the discussion was thoughtful. It was thorough. And staff, I wanted to say a huge thank you to staff who stayed on and the community. I think that the work was so important, and you guys all took the time to really analyze each word. It makes us as staff proud to be a part and to serve the board. So we just wanted to send a big thank you.
Oh, thank you, Patty. I think all of us, I mean, I know I'm speaking for myself, but I just know I'm speaking for everyone. When we are, as board members, we are in awe of what staff does. I just wondered if Jeff slept at all, or any of you. And so, oh my goodness, thank you so much for all of you do to make this magical work happen. So, is there anybody else who'd like to speak before we get started?
Can I just say a thank you to our staff as well?
Yes, go ahead.
Because it was a very long meeting and it was very tiring. And I noticed Jeff Van Holten's demeanor was always positive and upbeat. And I thought, it's so late. How can he still be this positive? But I thank him very much for carrying us through that process, and all the staff who maybe didn't have to be there, but were there to give input and were there to give support. So I just appreciated it tremendously. And to board members who so thoughtfully went through every word of the document and tried to do what they thought would be an improvement. So I'm very proud of our board. I thank you.
Oh, me too. Thank you, Janet. Is there anyone else? Okay, well, let us go ahead and get started. Just kind of like a check-in. We have 8 items, and so just given our time, I'm going to kind of think in chunks of 20 minutes. And so if something takes longer than 20 minutes, that means we're cutting into something else. And if something takes fewer than 20 minutes, then we have a little extra time somewhere else. So just kind of keep that in mind with the different items. Some might require more discussion than others, but I mean, of course, always ask and discuss what you need to. But with that, we're going to go ahead and start action item number 1, which is R277721, the Prime Pilot Program. This is new. And this comes from House Bill 336, the concurrent enrollment pilot that was passed in the 2020 general session. And I think we have Jeff and Christy who are going to talk about this and give us some background before we have our questions and discussion. So go ahead.
Good morning, everybody. Unfortunately, due to my Wi-Fi connection, I will not be able to turn on my camera without it freezing everything. So I can assure you I am not in pajamas. Whether or not you want to believe that, I guess, is up to you. But I did want to say also thank you to everyone last night. It's as I said in the chat, it's very easy to stay positive with such a great board and with such great coworkers. So it was fun. We did the people's work yesterday, and happy to continue to do it today. So with that, we're going to jump right into R277721. This rule is coming to you by way, as Board Member Gravitt mentioned, of House Bill 336, which was the Prime bill. It was legislation that was sponsored by Representative Val Peterson and Senator Ann Milner. This program, as you may recall, creates a 3-track system for high school students to receive transferable concurrent enrollment credit between all 8 public institutions of higher ed. And depending on which of the 3 you get will determine how much of your general ed requirements are essentially forgiven or waived, I should say. So just as a reminder, you have Launch, which is any 6 concurrent enrollment credits that you of any kind. You have the Discover, which is 15 concurrent enrollment credits, and the bill specified the type of credit needs to be. There was 5 different kinds. I believe that 3 of them were 3 different sciences, like physical life science, behavioral science, and then they had an English language arts and a math as well. And you'd need to get 3 credits in each of the 5 categories, and that would give you a launch certificate, which would wipe out half of your gen ed requirements. And then there's the Transform certificate, which if you complete is 30 concurrent enrollment credits, and it would forgive your gen ed requirement when you enter higher ed. So we were tasked a pilot program to create these 3 certificate tracks and to run the pilot in an LEA. And this rule, we were tasked with writing a rule to run the pilot program. So this rule is going to look fairly familiar in terms of form and substance. It was modeled heavily after the computer science grant program. We also took some inspirations from digital teaching and learning grant program as well. One note I will make right now for all of the board members, this bill received $800,000 to run the pilot program for 8 LEAs getting $100,000. However, this bill was one of the victims of the scale back of the budget during April and June. And we have not received a replenishment of those funds. There are some rumors that later this month there will be a special session and there could be some extra money that is given to us. And some of that money will supposedly go toward restoring funds that we lost. I don't know whether or not this will be one of those programs that receives funds if those rumors are true. So if those rumors end up not being true, or they are true and this does not end up being one of the chosen programs, just keep in mind that the policy and the law will stay in place and it will just lay dormant until there is funding put into the program to start it. But with that, the goal here, the one thing I really wanted to kind of highlight, we have a typical application process with A, B, C, D, and E right here on lines 33 to 39, kind of being the general things we're looking for in the application. I did want to point out that, like computer science and digital teaching and learning, we decided to do a review committee, which you'll see right here, to review the applications. And there's a lot of outside entities, as you can imagine, with concurrent enrollment and college credit. USBE is not the only party involved in the process. We've had a few people ask questions of, well, gosh, that's a lot of people for $800,000. Correct. Typically, we would not create such a large review committee for a pilot program, but because of the nature of this program and all the stakeholders that are involved in issuing college credit and the process of going through concurrent enrollment, we wanted to make sure that those players were all involved in the review process for the pilot program. There is very much intent on the legislature side to see if this program is successful. The measurement of success, seeing how many more students can get actually achieving what Senator Milner would say, I'm going to use my own words, but essentially concurrent enrollment credit that counts. She's very concerned about making sure that it's not just a bunch of electives that the student takes and they have all these credits that don't really help them as they go on to college. So that's the intent of this program, is see if we can increase the amount of students who are essentially taking concurrent enrollment courses that will actually help reduce their gen ed burden when they go into higher ed. So that's really the measure of success we're trying to go with here. But with that, I feel like I've given a lot of context and background, probably more than you were expecting. It's 3 in the morning after a late night. So I will just throw it back to you if you have any questions, and we can kind of walk through any of the process or procedures, but it should be a fairly familiar format in terms of pilot grant programs. You've seen a few of these rules recently.
Thank you, Jeff. You can't give too much background information. That really helps me context, especially the part about what do we do if there's not money and things like that. So thank you for that. Committee members, do we have questions for Jeff? Board Member Hanson, go ahead.
Thanks. Good morning, Jeff.
Good morning.
First question, I'm looking at 53E 10309 7BA, which says that we're supposed to create an application process as B, but A says that we're supposed to establish eligibility requirements. I didn't see any eligibility requirements in the rule. Are we just assuming if they can fill out the application that they're eligible, because they do have to offer certain courses and those sort of things? And I think that's
Correct.
spelled out down below, but how are we handling the eligibility requirements?
So essentially, the eligibility requirements, we wanted to keep those fairly open. We didn't want to restrict LEAs from feeling like they couldn't apply. So really the application requirements are the eligibility requirements. And then the review committee will wait and score the applications if there are more than 8, based on the information they get from the application process. But there was not a general sense that there was going to be an extreme amount of demand in this pilot program. So we didn't want to handcuff ourselves to a point of being unsuccessful out the gate by making eligibility outside of the application requirements too onerous.
So should we say that all LEAs are eligible,
Yes.
just to address that part of the code, or I think that's just understood?
I think we could add it here in section 1, if that would, just thinking out loud to myself. I feel like I've had a crash course in group editing in the last 48 hours, so this will be good for me.
Yes, you have.
I could change "and LEA" simply to say all LEAs may apply.
Yeah, I just, where it does say that we should establish eligibility requirements, I think it would be nice to have a mention of that in the rule. Just then if we need to tighten it up later, we'll be able to come back and do that.
Maybe even this is Board Member Earl, maybe even a wording somewhere that says, oh, now I can't, I should have wrote it down. Sorry, let me think for just a second. Let me see if I can remember.
Okay. Scott, does that feel good to you? All LEAs may apply?
Sure. I just
9:30.
think we need to mention eligibility and let them know, and I think that's great.
Yeah,
So,
great catch. Did you have another question before I
I
move
do.
to Janet?
I do. Line
Okay, go ahead.
61 in the rule talks about how the grants will be awarded. I think that and I'm usually saying, hey, let's take it down to the the specific line in the code. But when we go to B2, B2 only, get back to where it is. B2 only says it will select them and doesn't talk about the award. So we probably ought to broaden that out. It's really 2 and 3. To talk about the selecting and then distributing.
So would you like to broaden that out by removing the 2 and the B, or all?
I would just take it to B.
Take it to
7B.
B.
And then I noticed that in our backup information, we had the 201, 53E-1-201 that talks about reporting. Is there a report called out for this in 201?
That is a good question.
I couldn't see this section of the code called out in there, but I don't know.
Quickly look at House Bill 336. It does, yes. So 53E-1-201 was amended in House Bill 336 to include the crime program.
Okay, just not effective yet? Because I just pulled up the one that you had in your backup and it doesn't list it.
It should be effective. House Bill 336 went into effect on May 14th.
That's what I thought.
We may have posted an old version of 53E.
They're all, it says amended 2020.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So I don't know. Maybe here it is. Sorry. Prime pilot program, it's in there as G. My fault. It's there.
Okay. Perfect.
All right.
Whew, good.
That's all I had on this one.
Okay, thank you so much. So I just want to clarify on that. So we just changed line 30 and line 61, those kind of things. Board Member Cannon, you had a question?
Yes, I did. Thank you. So, Jeff, I'm not quite sure if the money for this program is not replenished. Does that mean we won't go ahead with the pilot program?
Correct.
Okay, good. And then I guess that is kind of a moot point. I was just wondering if the 8 LEAs have been determined, but I imagine not.
Correct.
Okay. And then could you just give me a little more background on what the $100,000 would be used for? Would it be used to pay concurrent course fees for the students? Would it be used for counseling students into taking concurrent courses that will meet their general requirements? Or what's the intent of the use of that money?
It's a great question. I'm going to attempt my answer, and I'm going to pull in my phone a friend with Christy Schreck.
Okay, good.
In the program as well. But I believe the money will be going toward establishing general administration of the program and implementation. What does that mean and what does that look like? I think will vary depending on LEA. I'm going to jump down to the uses of the funding. So it will not be allowed to fund a non-CTE or CE course. So I would imagine some LEAs would use this to expand their offerings for CE courses. I think that's probably going to be the primary use of the funding. But maybe I can jump over to Christy and see if we've thought through too far down the road in terms of what LEAs we think they would use the funding for. But my guess would be mostly for expanding course offerings to make sure, because the program in code does have some specific courses that students have to take in order to get the Discover or the Transform certificate. So if you don't offer those courses as an LEA, essentially your students cannot participate in the Prime program at all.
Oh.
Chrissy, is there anything else you'd want to add to that?
Good morning, Christy Schreck from Early College Specialist in Teaching and Learning. I think that is exactly what is considered to be used for creating pathways for those to earn those certificates, whether it's opening that digital delivery models so that the distant learning programs can be expanded, or for funding enrollment, such as recruiting students for the CE and CTE programs.
Oh, thank you, Christy. Thank you, Jeff. Janet, does that answer
Yes, my questions were answered well. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Board Member Earl, go ahead. Board Member Earl? I don't know if you're talking, but we can't hear you. I don't know if you're on.
Okay, no, it had logged off and I typed in my password twice and I've got two computers going and maybe you guys do too, but while I was reading down through some, it logged out.
We understand.
Jana asked one of my questions. I was curious also what what they would primarily be using that funding for. And so that answered one of those questions. Oh, goodness. Oh, we're using the acronym PRIME. I'm assuming it's an acronym, but there's nowhere I saw even in the law where it's actually spelled out what that stands for. Maybe it doesn't stand for anything. I don't know, but where it's in capital letters, you would assume it would stand for something. And maybe it's not necessary to spell that out, but usually when there's an acronym in the definitions section, we have that listed there.
Yeah, Jenny, I thought the same thing. So can someone respond to that? Because I don't think it's an acronym, but it's screaming at us. So.
Yes, it is in all caps. Those emails or those texts you get in all caps saying PRIME.
Yes.
So I will say this candidly and on the public record, I care very deeply for our legislators. I think they do a great job. I would not say that all of them are skilled at marketing. And therefore, I don't know that putting plans into a bill is always the wisest idea, which is essentially what we saw happen here. Typically, with a program, you wouldn't name the program with its catchy slogan and start naming, the certificates in here have fun names like Launch, Discover, Transform. You typically would not see that in a bill, but in this bill, they decided they really wanted to name and kind of put their marketing spin on what they were putting, and they made PRIME all caps. It does not stand for anything. It's not an acronym.
Okay. Well,
so we're just going to mark it what they gave us.
I just wanted to make sure if it did have an acronym that we had it included for some reason.
I think you should make one up. And then you should contact. I feel like
okay. I'll lobby next session for that.
Go ahead. Sorry, Board Member Earl.
Yeah, that's all right. And then the wording that I was thinking might work too. We can keep it whatever, but application is open to all LEAs or something like that. But whatever we've got in there is fine. Those were just my questions. So that's it, actually. Jack, the question I was wondering about.
Okay, so maybe after we make a motion, if somebody does want to change that, if you're not happy with that, we could do that then. But otherwise, if there are no other questions, we are ready for a motion.
This is Board Member Cannon. I'll make a motion that the committee approve draft 1 as amended because Scott did the amendment, right?
Yes.
On first reading and forward it to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Okay, so the motion before the committee is that the committee approve R277721 draft 1 as amended, and that would be on lines 30 and line 61, I believe. So, and then we would forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Is there any discussion to that motion? And then I want to make sure Nora Lee has the amendments correct.
I do.
Oh, of course you do. Silly me. Thank you, Nora Lee. Do we have any discussion to that motion? Okay, seeing none, committee members, go ahead and vote. Okay, just double checking. I want to make sure that Board Member Earls and Board Member Marsh's. Okay, Marsh, your hand is up just because you approve, not because you have a question, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so the motion passes unanimously. Okay, thank you, Jeff and Christy, for your help on that one. And committee members, we're ready to move to action item number 2. Okay, so this one, give you a second to transition. This one is the Utah Methods of Administration Plan. And I believe we have Talia, and this one requires a bit of background for us, but reading through it, it's a lot of good stuff. And Christy, will you help us understand why this action is coming forward and what we need to know about it?
You bet. To Leah Longhurst, I'm the Director of Career and Technical Education here at USBE. So nice to see you all. It's been a couple of months since we presented to you, so we're happy to be here today. I have some staff in the background if I need to phone a friend, so we'll proceed that way. I am going to also turn my video off just to improve my bandwidth here at home. And so, Jeff, if you'd like to put up maybe the document, I'll begin my explanation so that you know what we're talking about today. We know that the board has prioritized equity for each student, and what we're going to talk about today is a small piece of equity here in the state of Utah. And I do need to give you a little bit of background so that you understand why we're here today and what we're talking about and why this is important. So in 1979, the U.S. Department of Education issued some guidelines for CTE programs that explained the civil rights responsibilities of recipients of federal funds for those offering CTE programs. And basically the bottom line is that, that we are required to help LEAs prohibit discrimination on the basis of race, color, national origin, sex, and disability in any program or activity receiving federal funds. Since the year 1979, and in my mind, that wasn't that long ago, but it really has been a fair number of years. There have been a series of revisions, dear colleague letters, and memorandums of procedures that were released by the Department of Education that has guided the work. Bring you to current now, in February of 2020, the Department of Education, specifically the Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Education, which is the section that I work with, and the Education's Office of Civil Rights, released an updated memorandum of procedures for state agencies responsible for the administration of CTE to use in developing what we refer to as methods of administration, or our civil rights reviews that we're required to do. And all prior guidance at that time was rescinded. So as the state eligible agency for CTE or Perkins funds, USBE is now allowed to update their plan. And really the goal of all of this is to harmonize our civil rights compliance activities that are required by receiving the federal dollars with our Perkins 5 state plans. And you might remember earlier this spring, you all approved our state Perkins 5 plan, and that has been submitted to the Department of Education and approved. And we now are in our first full year of that. really the goal and the thing that's exciting to me about this opportunity to more fully align our civil rights work in CTE with our Perkins 5 plan is because Perkins 5 really does have some meaningful changes around equity. And it's been a long time coming, I think. We've learned a lot over the last many years. We do collect data on a very important group of students that historically have been underserved. The data, however, is aggregate data only. No personally identifiable information is shared. And we really look at a lot of different subcategories, including those that we're required to by this plan. So again, let me highlight those. We will be looking at race, color, national origin, sex, and disability. Perkins 5 also focuses on non-traditional training and employment, and in terms of definition of that for Perkins, that is all gender-based. We are also required in our Perkins plan to make funds available for the recruitment of special populations, and special populations by definition for Perkins is not just disability, but it's all of the different subcategories that we look at and look for those gaps. Perkins 5 also requires a local needs assessment every 2 years by each subrecipient, and Perkins 5 focuses on equal access to high-quality CTE courses and programs of study. And I also wanted to point out really quickly that this methods of administration plan, because we are the eligible recipient for Perkins 5, and because Perkins 5 is for both secondary and post-secondary institutions offering career and technical education programs, this methods of administration plan covers both secondary and post-secondary. So we put together a collaborative team that involved a lot of folks in different sections in our office, as well as our post-secondary partners, to put our plan together. The work of the methods of administration plan is meant to be proactive. Our monitoring is not done in response to complaints. We serve to aid those subrecipients to identify and rectify potential discrimination, harassment, and or bullying situation, as well as trends allegedly caused by educational policies, practices, systems, as well as any person-to-person occurrence. And really, if I could highlight for you our data, we've been doing this for many, many years now. Our data, our indicators over the last 5 years show a lot of improvements. We're doing better. However, there are two kind of what I would consider our top violations that we encounter almost everywhere that we go, and that is overall physical accessibility and civil rights notifications and grievance policies are not posted the way that they should be. So let me stop there, see if you have any questions, and then what I'll do is really highlight what this new plan proposes and take any other questions.
Thank you, Talia. Thank you so much for that background. And I love that you tie it back to the strategic plan. I just keep thinking I need to remember with everything we talked about. And I just think it's adorable that you said, not adorable, but it's a small piece of equity. I love that summary. So thank you so much for that background. And then let's see what kinds of questions we have from committee members. Board Member Earl, go ahead.
So I'm trying to understand the process. Do we oversee just simply so the subrecipients would be within the education system, or because we are the entity that is responding to this, it's several systems. Does that make sense? Is it higher ed, or is it just like the public education system?
Right. So as the state eligible recipient for Perkins 5, and because Perkins 5 flows out and involves both secondary and post-secondary, this methods of administration plan goes hand in hand with that. And so any subrecipient, any district or charter that offers CTE programs, and any post-secondary institution that offers CTE programs, which is all of them except for the University of Utah, all public education institutions, they then are part of this methods of administration plan and oversight.
Okay, and do you have personnel then that works with you?
Yep, we do. So,
Compliance?
that comes out of Perkins funding. That's one of our allowable expenditures. We have a half-time employee, Murray Mazeros, who coordinates that. He's our methods of administration coordinator for the board. And then we have other folks that we work with across the different sections in equity, in special education, in facilities, through financial operations. There's quite a group that will that work together on these.
Okay, so this may go along with the statement you made at the very end of your presentation, but this is kind of an interesting thing. You can tell me how you can do it. But on B, which is at the bottom of page 3, it says guidance. Review those sub-recipients with the greatest potential for civil rights noncompliance. How do you do that? Do you know what I mean? So I'm just trying to think. You're looking for the offenders, or supposed, they may not. It may be ignorance, more than deliberateness, right? Are those just based on what you commonly see or what's commonly seen, and so therefore, I don't know how do you get those sub-recipients?
If you don't mind, let me move ahead with 3 more points and talk about what our plan proposes and what we'll be submitting, and that I think will hopefully help answer your question.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, so our current plan that we're asking you to approve and forward to the board for full approval would involve 3 phased-in steps, if you will. The first year, which is the current school year 2021, we will be developing what we call a risk assessment tool. And that will be similar to risk tools that we use on the financial side, but it will be a programmatic risk tool. We'll also work on technical assistance, which we provide currently. We'll continue providing annual training and really take it up a notch to all sub-recipients. And then we'll conduct a comprehensive review of all sub-recipient websites for the notification and grievance policies. Finally, this year, in addition to that work, Murray will be closing out any open review that we've done in the past that has not been finalized yet with a voluntary compliance plan. In school year 21-22, we'll begin using that risk tool, and that risk tool really will look at data. We already gather this data, but we'll do an in-depth analysis with our partners and with the sub-recipients themselves, looking at the data. A lot of it is really around enrollment. If students are enrolled at the same relative percentage as the population of the school. And I can talk a little bit more about that in a second, but we'll begin using that risk tool with data that we already collect, provide annual training and technical assistance. And then in year 3 and moving beyond that, we'll continue with the risk tool. And then when data shows the need and potential risks, we will conduct up to 2 on-site reviews a year. Also continue providing that annual training and technical assistance. And really what we've done historically, and we'll continue to do, is to look at the data, the performance data, the enrollment data of all of our students, and then look at those different subcategories and how are those students of other races, of various races, of different nationalities, of gender, of disability, how are they doing? Are they being served at the same rate that mirrors the demographics of the school? And is there room for potential violation that we need to be looking at and working with the LEAs and the post-secondary institutions around? And again, remember, these reviews, this monitoring is done in a proactive way. This is not in response to any complaints. That's a whole different thing that happens when there actually is a complaint, but this is a proactive way to help LEAs and post-secondary institutions kind of help themselves so they don't get into a situation that is more difficult. Does that answer your question, board member?
Actually, that does. So it's kind of a pre-notification and training, and then after that there would be just a follow-through for compliance. And those that aren't responding would be maybe the top picks to begin with, so to speak.
Correct. And again, we're looking at those performance gaps or the enrollment gaps.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Excellent. Board Member Cannon.
Thank you. Jenny asked several of my questions, but I do want to know how much money is involved in this. How much comes to us for Perkins, and how much of that is used for this in this plan?
So that's a great question. In our Perkins allocation, 85% of our Perkins money, which is around 15 million a year currently, 85% of that flows out to the LEAs and post-secondary institutions. 5% of that money can be kept in our office and is kept in our office for administration of Perkins. It is part of that money, a portion that helps to fund the halftime FTE that puts this together. Other sections that I mentioned, equity, special education, school counseling, those folks have responsibilities in the same vein. And so we collaborate with them so that we're working together on monitoring for these kinds of things all together. So I guess you could add in some of the things that they do and the money that goes to pay for parts of those FTE. But it's not a huge amount of money. And personally, I think it's a very important expenditure.
I agree with you. I would like to say that I appreciate that many times federal programs now do give a very small amount for administration, because I know there are times when that didn't happen, and that just was the unfunded mandate and made things very difficult. So I'm glad that we have 5% for administration. And then I was wondering about the risk tool as well, and you said it's data driven. And I just want to confirm, when you're putting together this data, what you're looking at is equity, and we want to ensure that underrepresented students have access to Perkins money and this type of thing, correct?
Well, so let me take you back in history a little bit. Back in 1979, back when the term was vocational education, I always try not to use that one, so I use current terminology. But back then, what was happening is that students were either being put into CTE programs, vocational programs, at a disproportionate rate, or not allowed access into different programs at a disproportionate rate. And so what they were trying to do is make sure that that was being paid attention to. And the reason that CTE is charged with this particular thing, if you will, with this particular point of monitoring and compliance, is because our courses are elective courses for the most part. And if you were to look at math or English language arts or science, those are all requirements that every student has to participate in. So there's very little room for outright discrimination. Everyone takes those classes. And so when you look at elective courses, CTE makes up the bulk of the elective world, and there really is opportunity for discrimination there. And that's my understanding of why this is in the CTE world.
Okay, thank you. Then it talks about sub-recipients over and over again. And I imagine the definition of sub-recipients in this case is district and charters.
And post-secondary institutions. Anyone receiving Perkins funds is considered a sub-recipient.
Okay. And so my question is, how many of our districts and charters participate in Perkins?
Great question. All 41 school districts. And I have Wendy on, I believe that's the case. We historically have had 2 or 3 very small rural districts who have chosen not to in the past, just simply because as Deputy Superintendent Jones says, the juice wasn't worth the squeeze. But for them, it was a lot of work for very little money because they were so small. Perkins is allocated on a enrollment basis. Now in Perkins 5, many of our LEAs and post-secondary institutions have formed consortia, and so they group together and do their planning and expenditure of funds together. And so I believe that all 41 of our school districts are now participating, and we have, at last count, I don't have a hard number for you, but I believe it's at least 18 to 20 secondary charter schools are also participating in CTE programs. Not all of them are accessing Sarah Perkins dollars. Wendy, I don't know if you want to pop in really quick. Wendy Morton is one of my CTE coordinators. Do you have the exact number?
Sorry, I do not have the exact number. We have a lot more of charter schools participating now because of the consortium model that a lot of regions have adopted. My estimate right now, without looking up exact numbers, is that we have about 6 or 7 charter schools participating within regions. Other charter schools are participating in state programs, just not the federal program. And remember, these are primarily charter schools that offer grades 9 through 12, simply because of the capacity to offer CTE programs.
Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you, Janet. Thank you, Wendy, and thank you to Leah. Do we have any other questions? Okay, if we have no more questions, we are ready for someone to make a motion. Please.
This is Janet. I'll move the committee forward a recommendation to the board for approval of the Utah Methods of Administration Plan.
Thank you. So the motion before the committee is that we forward a recommendation to the board for approval of the Utah Methods of Administration Plan. Do we have any discussion to that motion? Okay, seeing none, let's go ahead and vote. Excellent. That motion passes unanimously. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for all the good work you're doing, Talia and Wendy. Thank you, committee.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, committee, we are going to move to action item number 3, which is a repeal. So this is action, this is R277528, the use of public education job enhancement performance, PJEB, funds. This is a rule that is sunsetting. And so I believe, Jeff, you're going to talk to us about this and give us some details as to why we don't need this anymore.
I will do a quick start, and then we've got Sherry Rubin and Susan Mcrae on as well. If you guys have any historical questions you want on this program, they did a fabulous job running it. But as mentioned, the state statute around this rule actually has expired. There was a sunset date on the state statute that ran the program, and it was July of this year, July 1st. It was intentional that we let this program sunset. It hasn't been funded for several years. So we've been using the remaining funds to just kind of pay out the existing scholarships. This program generally is a scholarship for teachers to enhance their jobs and their credentials and whatnot, which is a very poor summary of the program. I'll probably defer to Sherry and Susan for like the detailed summary. But essentially, that's why this is being repealed. The code is gone, the funding is gone, so we don't need the rule.
Thank you, Jeff. Sherry, if you're there, would you mind telling the committee just what it's being replaced with? You know, what's the situation now, or anything historical that might help the committee make this vote?
So this particular rule, we haven't received money since fiscal year 2011 from the legislature. And I believe it was in 2015 or 16 that they said, hey, you can't even use the money that you have for remaining scholarships, like to give new scholarships. So the last several years has just been let's get through the scholarships we have. Let's make sure everybody has the opportunity to finish their program. And then our last person graduated in May of 2019, so a little over a year ago. So we haven't even had anybody active going to school that we're paying for a little over a year now.
Thank you for that background. That helps. Committee members, do we have any questions? I also see that Susan Mcrae is there. Susan, do you have anything to add that you would like to provide for us?
I Susan Mcrae. I was the financial analyst for this program. I'd just like to say that we were able to help out 1,656 educators. 680 of that was through sign-on bonuses through the district, and 976 individual educators either received a degree or an endorsement with this program.
Susan, thank you for that. I love hearing that specific people, real people, were helped by this. So thank you. Questions by committee members?
I'm ready to make a motion, if that's all right, Board Member
Yes,
Earl.
that would be great. Thank you.
My motion is that the committee repeal R277528 on first reading and recommend the board repeal the rule on second and final reading.
Okay, the motion before the committee is that the committee repeal R277528 on first reading and recommend the board repeal the rule on second and final reading. Do we have any discussion to that motion? Seeing none, go ahead and vote. Okay, that motion passes unanimously. Thank you, everyone. Okay, committee, let's move on to action item number 4, which is R277921. This is the Strengthening College and Career Readiness Program. It's an amendment and a continuation. It's updating the standards for counselor licensing, which I appreciate because, fun fact, I also have my school counseling endorsement, and I just haven't worked in that capacity. So I'm always interested in this one. Jerry Sagers, I think, is going to talk to us about this one and give us some information and background.
Good morning, Jerry Sagers, School Counseling Program Specialist. The purpose of this amendment is to update the existing language for College and Career Readiness Certificate in order to correspond with updates to Licensing Rule R277306, Educator Preparation Programs. The changes to R277921 will allow for consistency between both rules regarding expectations for counselor licensing and certification. This rule also updates the standards for school counselor competencies to be demonstrated by a candidate in a school counselor preparatory program. We bring this item to you today to seek your approval and ask if you have any questions for me.
Okay, thank you, Jerry. Committee members, do we have any questions about this rule? Board Member Cannon, go ahead.
Thank you. So it seems to me like this is a competency-based certificate, and we have these components that are going on for people to be gain competency. And then I'm just wondering, how does this affect our university-trained counselors? Is this something they have to get, or who is this really serving in terms of the professionals?
So we have worked with a committee of pre-service educators and directors, and so it is aligned exactly with the pre-service. So these competencies are embedded into their program, into their courses also. So it all aligns together. Does that, and then really this is for counselors that are licensed that have not recently gone through their program.
So then, I understand that these are, so this would be something as people are working on getting their degree, this would be something that they get along the way. And then it's also like a professional update for those who, a professional development for those already in the field.
Yes, but also students who will be graduating from this point forward will already get these competencies in their courses.
Does that make sense, Janet?
Yeah, thank you.
Great question. Thank you, Jerry. Do we have any other questions?
Something that they get along the way, like a professional update, those who, a professional development for those already in the field.
Yes, but also.
Weird. Are you guys hearing an echo?
Yes.
Oh, Janet, I was like, You're saying the same thing you just said.
Someone's watching us on YouTube at the same time. There's a lag.
I thought it was magic again. Okay, well, we'll just go with it. Are there any other questions? I think Board Member Earl.
Yeah, I do have a question. So the College and Career Readiness Certificate Program standards, those have been edited and updated, but those are not coming before us, right? We're only approving the one item. So will the College and Career Readiness Certificate Program standards be coming before us? How does that work?
Yeah, Jerry, can you speak to that?
Yeah, so this rule incorporates by reference the College and Career Readiness Certificate Program standards.
Okay, those standards have already been approved, or they're in the process of going through approval, or?
That is part of this rule.
Okay, so I'm sorry, maybe I'm misunderstanding. So in approving R272, okay, wait a minute. Okay, so in approving this, we actually are approving the standards as well?
Correct. Jeff, can you speak to that?
Yes. So as you see on the screen, we are adding the incorporation by reference for the standard. So yes, you are approving the standard as part of the rule. The standard, and we might want to bring in Kim Herrera. She had made some comments in our prep meeting for this as well, or Jerry, if you want to speak to it, but standards themselves already exist, and the update, I believe, is not extensive, but I want to speak for Kim or Jerry in terms of what changed in this version of the standard versus what already exists.
Yes, and we did include in the board doc the edited version that shows the old standards and then what was changed.
I'm wondering, is Kim, would you like to speak to that to help us understand a little more?
Of course. Hi, can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Kim Herrera. I'm also a school counseling program specialist. I would love to speak to this. Component 1 and Component 3 were developed in 2015 and have been long-standing. And as you can see through the revised document, there were very minor revisions made to this. Component 2 historically has been completed by practicing school counselors through attending a school counseling program updates and essentials training. What I love about the direction that we are asking for is that we are being more proactive, so school counselors will already come into the field with the skill set that we expect them to have in order to provide college and career readiness counseling to students, and rather than just having them earn those competencies once they're into the field. So I love this proactive approach. So what we did with Component 2 is we worked with our pre-service programs to develop standards that they could demonstrate competencies within their program so that they can, upon licensure, they will actually receive the College and Career Readiness Certificate on their license as well. So again, to reinforce what has already been said, this is a kind of a two-part process. One, it is to enhance the competency and skill set for counselors coming into the field through their pre-service program, as well as those in the field who have not received these trainings or demonstrated competencies, that they can still do that as well. So we're kind of attacking it from both ends. And this was a very collaborative effort to review and finalize these standards with not only our pre-service directors and instructors, but also practicing school counselors, school counseling district leadership, and our Utah system of higher education partners, as well as we had our career and technical education staff review these components as well.
Thank you so much, Kim. That helps. Jenny?
Yeah, so, okay. I guess that does answer my question. So the purple's new, right? The second was recently, Component 2 is recently developed. There's quite a bit under that. There's a lot of jargon in here as far as education and political jargon. I'm wondering if there's even some duplication on some of these. You're saying that who developed these again? Did this come from an entity? These
Yeah,
recommendations?
so in 2015, they partnered, so legislation put forth that they wanted USBE staff to create this certificate program. So USB staff worked with business and industry, CTE, higher education, districts, and schools to develop the original content. And what is really good about the standards is they align directly to our Cte standards, which is our national accreditation for school counseling programs. And so, yes, these standards are directly aligned with Cte standards for counseling programs.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Do we have any other questions from committee members? Board Member Cannon.
I have another question. So I'm wondering what the annual appropriation is for this program, because or how much money do we have to give out in grants? Because line 59 talks about grant applications.
Mm-hmm. Who wants to tackle that one?
So I'm going to give some historical perspective, and then I would like Jerry or Jeff to add anything that I may have missed. But the grant program the money ran out in 2017 through the legislation. And so the biggest part of the grant program was to pay the Southern Education Regional Board for their curriculum. And we have developed that through this partnership to have it in-house. And so now we own all of the curriculum and do not have to pay for that anymore. So there's actually no need for continuing funds to sustain this program. This program is self-sustainable, and we can move forward without the grant funding.
Yay, that's a self-sustaining program. That sounds great. Thank you.
Okay, do we have any other questions from committee members or anything you're just wanting to know?
Madam Chair, are you ready for a motion?
I am always ready for a motion, Board Member Marsh.
Okay, I'd make a motion that we continue and approve R277-921, draft 1 on its first reading, and forward it to the remainder of the board for approval on second and final reading.
Okay, thank you. So the motion before the committee is that the committee continue and approve R277-921 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Do we have any discussion to that motion? Just checking, Board Member Cannon, your hand's still up, but I don't know if it's left over from the last one.
Yes. So if the money ran out and we no longer have that money or need that money, do we need the procedure and criteria for awarding grant if there is no more grant money?
Mm-hmm.
Do we need to have that in there, or should that be removed? That's my question.
Great question. So who could respond to that? Please, phone a friend.
I could start, and then Kim and Jerry fill in if I miss anything. But with the grant program, while the program is self-sustaining overall, there is still the possibility that funding could be brought in and we could do a grant program down the road. And so when we were discussing the updates for this rule, the discussion was we did not want to get rid of the grant program language just yet, but stay tuned. If as things continue on, we may bring this rule back and make further adjustments based on that. But there were a couple of details out there that we wanted to work out before we did anything too drastic.
Oh, that makes sense to me. Does anyone else want to respond to that or fill in any gaps that Jeff may have missed? But okay, Janet, does that help? You understand?
Yes, I understand that, and I feel okay about bringing it in. I guess that never hurts to hope for more money.
Yeah, very true, very true. Board Member Earl? Board Member Earl, do you have a question?
Sorry, I'm just indicating that I will not be voting for this at this time. I need to do a little bit more research in some of these standards, what they really mean. Like I said, there's a lot of both political as well as other jargon in here. I want to look into this a little deeper into what these standards are intended to do. So, or the duplication of some of them. So I'm just letting you know that.
Oh, thank you. Any other discussion to the motion? Okay, seeing none, the motion before the committee is to continue and approve R277-921, draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Go ahead and vote now. Okay, the motion passes with 1 no. The no is Board Member Earl. Wait, Board Member Marsh, are you a no? Oh, there's your hand. Okay, so the motion passes with 1 nay, and that would be Board Member Earl. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Jerry, Jeff, and committee members, and all of you who helped on that one.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move to action item number 5. This is R277-403, the school safety program. This one's new, but we've heard some things about it. With the multidisciplinary teams. And I think we have Rhett Larson here who's going to talk through this new rule for us and answer any questions. Rhett?
Yes. Good morning, Chair Gravitt and board. Rhett Larson, School and Student Safety Specialist. So the School Safety Center that consists of specialists from the Utah State Board of Education, the Division of Substance Abuse and Mental Health, and the Department of Public Safety and Safe UT worked on this rule with Jeff, and I also have with me one of our liaisons, Scott Ayer, here to present with me today, and I will let him introduce himself now. Scott, are you there? He might be having some audio issues, so I'll just move on if that's okay.
Okay, yeah, and Scott, if you hadn't happened to get here, just pop on in. Thanks. Continue, Rhett.
You bet. So this rule is being created to establish what's called the School Safety Grant Program. It's related to an appropriation listed in House Bill 120, the Student and School Safety Requirements from the 2019 General Session. This funding was appropriated for the creation of a pilot program, and this rule that we present to you today provides the necessary parameters.
Okay, thank you. There's a lot in there. Committee members, what questions do you have? Board Member Hanson, go ahead.
Thanks. As I look at this, there's lots of aspects to school safety. We talk about different threats, active shooter type stuff, natural disasters, fire, all that. This seems to focus on, it looks like, disciplinary actions and threatening behaviors. Is there a reason that we're focused there? Is the money appropriated for that kind of thing, or how did we narrow things down?
Absolutely, Chair. Are you okay if I answer that question?
Yes, please. Thank you.
So I also got a message from Scott. He's saying that the presenter has been muted, and so it won't let him speak.
Oh, well, who has power to do that, to fix that problem?
Scott, my apologies. I have unmuted you. I didn't realize I muted you.
Hello, I'm here. Am I here now?
Yes, Scott, thank you.
Yeah, Scott Ayer with the Division of Substance Abuse and Mental Health. I'm here to support as well. I'll let Rhett lead out. I'm sorry if you don't mind repeating that question, Board Member Hanson.
Sure. Just talking about the various aspects of safety, that's a big subject. And it looks like in this rule, we're narrowing that down to just a couple of particular areas where we're talking about disciplinary actions. This is the LEA's criteria for being selected. Disciplinary actions and threatening behaviors. Is are other aspects of safety not part of this program, or how did we get just to that area?
Rhett, if you don't mind, I'll take this.
Sure.
Yes, Board Member Hanson, several other areas have really been considered. Disciplinary data will be maybe the primary lead on this. It will have an eye towards looking specifically at suspension and expulsions, and we do want to understand where students, or not students, but where LEAs are at to begin with. But also we're looking to some of the psychological safety aspects, improved school climate. We do know that when threats are taken seriously in a meaningful way and dealt with a CSTAG model, which in this case, typically what we find is it reduces racial disparities. It allows teachers to feel safer and students to feel safer, that the process is being addressed in a fair and equitable way. And so that's really some of the other components. We also expect to maybe see some improvements in things like attendance, maybe, or other areas that may be impacted by this. However, discipline will probably be our primary focus. Does that help to answer your question?
It does. Maybe I can just follow up a little bit. So we're focusing mostly on threats from students, student-on-student violence or student threats towards the organization. It looks like to me, can any of this money be used for things like cameras and locks on doors, things like that would also contribute to school safety?
Certainly. At this point, the focus would be on professional development, general administration, and implementation of the CSTAG program, and not any without any school hardening dollars to be spent in those areas. So this would not allow for that. That's my understanding, unless Rhett, you want to correct me.
Rhett, do you have anything to add to that?
Sure, if that's okay. So that's correct. So this last legislative session, there was quite a bit of money that was appropriated towards those school safety measures, but unfortunately, we lost that funding due to the recent events with the pandemic. And so really, this is to help build the school safety program, and that's what the funds were allocated for. And as a school safety center, we've really looked at where is our areas of need? Where do we really want to focus in making our schools safer, but also providing reasonable supports and interventions for students. And so this has been an ongoing process in looking to what areas do we need to improve on, and we've used data from the school safety survey to kind of help guide that. And so hopefully that answers your question, Board Member Hanson.
Just one more, and thank you. We're getting there. So does HB 120 limit the funds to this type of program that's dealing with student behaviors, or is that something that we decided to do?
Chair, are you okay if I answer that?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Rhett.
Okay.
I was waiting.
So when it talks about the school safety program, and Jeff, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, it doesn't specifically talk about school discipline data or those types of scenarios, but we've really looked at, we have $150,000 for a pilot school program, which is not, we're grateful for that funding, but really when you look at hardening of schools, some of those those measures are very costly. And so we really feel like this is a great opportunity for us to look in a more restorative way in looking to create that school safety program in the threat assessment, the CSTAG, which is the Comprehensive School Threat Assessment Guidelines, having multidisciplinary teams who can look at the threats that schools have to deal with that are made by students to determine if they're serious or not serious, and then kind of determine what kind of supports or what they need to do at that point. And so we're really trying to look at it in the way of a holistic approach and not necessarily just in one way of hardening the building. We feel like the need right now is really to look at student behavior, student threats, and being that support to our LEAs.
Thank you.
Chair, if I may.
Oh, please.
I just put up on the screen for everyone to see the language from House Bill 120. This was one of those interesting appropriations that came with, they gave us the money and these 2 lines of instruction, and there's actually no program created in the actual code. So we were kind of given a blank check with very specific instructions on these 2 lines. So you'll see Board Member Hanson, part of the reason why we started to focus more toward the school safety side and student behavior is that's kind of embedded in the language here of what we were supposed to be doing with this pilot program. And I will also note it's $150,000, so it's not a lot of money to really spread out. So as much as we'd love to expand it, I think the team felt like honoring this language and then trying to be most effective with the least amount of money that they had, targeting it on a very specific goal was kind of the purpose. But this is really what kind of set the parameters for the rule.
Got it. And I see that Patty's put something in the chat that's also helpful. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you both. And just from a teacher perspective, sometimes I really appreciate the focus at almost the systemic level so that there's education there and to kind of direct those funds specifically to maybe some education and to creating those multidisciplinary teams that can change the school climate a little bit. Jenny, Board Member Earl, you have a question? Board Member Earl? Let me try. Board Member Earl?
I'm sorry, I really should create a smaller password to get in because I mess it up every time I'm trying to hurry and put it in, and then I have to go back and do it 3 times, so I do apologize.
That's okay.
I'm actually good. I was wondering about the money and such, where it's not really that much money and how it was going to be spent. It sounds like most of that information was answered already.
Yeah, thank you so much, staff, for getting those things to us so quickly and getting those questions answered. Board Member Cannon?
Yes, I'm perseverating a little bit on this money. Is it all gone? And are we still creating a pilot program without any funding? Or do we get 150,000? What is the status currently of the money?
I can take that one if you don't mind. And Board Member Earl, you're unmuted. Has a little bit of an echo.
Oh, thank you.
This, just as a reminder, this was 2019 legislation, and so the funding was not impacted by the recent pandemic and what happened there, because the pandemic and the altering of the budget was related to our 2020 session and the money that was allocated for FY21. So this money we got a year ago, actually, and we've been trying to get the school safety center up and running because that was also created in this bill in 2019. And so now that they've got their feet under them, they are now going to take off with their first big project one of their first big projects with this pilot program. And it is a 3-year pilot, just so you know.
And then it talks in the bill about LEAs applying for a 3-year grant where they get $37,500 annually. So how have we started out with granting those to LEAs? How many LEAs have been interested? How many can we fund?
I'll toss it to Rhett.
Sure. Can I answer that question, Chair?
Yes, please. Go ahead, Rhett.
Wonderful. So, Board Member Cannon, this board rule that we're seeking for approval outlines the parameters that we will use to create a competitive grant process. And so LEAs will apply through the Utah Grants Management System. We will only be selecting 4 schools so we can provide them, the 37,500. So the 4 schools, that's the 150,000. It is for 3 years. And then at the end of the 3 years, we'll reevaluate and either add additional pilot schools or see what we need to do there to be the ongoing support.
Okay, that's helpful. And will you just maybe speak to me a little bit? The rule prohibits use of money in many ways. What can the money be used for?
Okay, Rhett, do you want to speak to that?
Absolutely, I'd be happy to. So this funding can be used for stipends and professional development. One thing that we feel would be really important is to allow our LEAs to really support their multidisciplinary teams in allowing them to travel to some of these really great out-of-state conferences for school safety, to kind of help build upon their knowledge, but also to provide that experience and that networking so that we can really start building that program there. And so it's really up to them. They have a variety of things that they could do there, but that's just a couple of examples. I hope that helps.
That does. Thank you. Those are my questions.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, those examples really help me too. What other questions do we have from committee members? Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions. Ready for a motion, if somebody would like to make that?
I will move that the committee approve R277-403 School Safety Program, Draft 1, on first reading and forward it to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Thank you, Janet. The motion before the committee is that the committee approve R277-403 Draft 1, which is the School Safety Program, on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Is there discussion to that motion? Seeing none, go ahead and vote. Okay, that motion passes unanimously. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Rhett. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, committee members. Thank you, Jeff, always. Okay, committee, we are moving right along to item number 6. This is the future of accreditation. I feel like this is going to be a TV program, the future of accreditation in Utah. I think it's important, and Jennifer Thronson will be here to talk to us about this, but the important thing for this discussion is that luckily, we are not in charge of fixing accreditation or changing accreditation. We're just going to review the recommendations from the Accreditation Advisory Council and give them direction as to where they should proceed next. So, Jennifer Thronson, I believe you're here and you will say much more articulately what we need to do here.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chair. So Jennifer Thronson, Director of Teaching and Learning and leader of accreditation for the state board in terms of somebody has to be over it. So it has been deemed me. And as part of that work, we have organized an advisory council to really look at accreditation, monitor how it's going and seeing if what we currently have is working. That council has met several times over the last several months, really looking at what was current, what was working, what wasn't working, and what could be the future dream state of accreditation. And so at this point, we've had enough discussion, have some recommendations for the board's consideration, and ultimately the decisions made by the board will guide the future work of our accreditation council and what accreditation looks like moving forward. So if you're unfamiliar, currently we have an outside accrediting body, Cognia, that provides all of the accreditation supports to our LEAs, and it is completely funded at the local level. There are no state dollars that go into accreditation. It is statutorily required, and it just says the board shall make rules around accreditation. And so everything other than the board shall make rules is done at the board level related to accreditation. So with that said, the document you have, that's kind of our council membership, just so you can see the diversity. We have anywhere from superintendents to people with decades of experience in accreditation, as well as school principals, district office folks, assistant superintendents, and so on. Board member Davis is also on this council as kind of a listening ear and participant in the decision making. So the group has worked to articulate what is the intent of accreditation. If we're going to, if we value accreditation, why do we value it and what does it mean? And so in the document for your backup today, there is a statement that the group has really worked hard to kind of come to consensus around but really is focused on continuous improvement through self-reflection and peer feedback, and that external peer feedback. They really do value having others come into their systems to look at the work that's being done and to give them additional feedback on their performance, as well as to advance their practice and ensure a standard of educational quality. And I would like to see if we can, Board Chair, if you wouldn't mind, if we can go through each recommendation separately as separate items and probably vote on each one as separate entities, although there is some interconnectedness. So as we go, if it makes more sense not to do it that way, but I would propose one will kind of lead into the other. So
okay, yeah, I would prefer that as well. And if there are questions and we have to get into all of them, that's fine. But I would like to go one at a time. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so recommendation number one, like I said, currently for the state, we have partnered with Cognia as our accrediting body. Given the discussion in the council, and it's been robust discussion to come to this recommendation for the board, the council would recommend that the state become the accrediting body, and we no longer partner with an external entity to do that, but that we bring accreditation inside the State Department. And so the implication for what that means for the USBE is that we would need some staff hired at the USBE and funding provided by the legislature to support those positions and lead the accreditation team reviews. There is an alternate way of doing this. This seems in terms of the schools currently are paying in. For example, Davis just finished their systems accreditation. It cost them $140,000 to do so. So you could continue to collect fees from the LEAs to pay for accreditation as an alternate option of what the implications are, but ultimately we would need staff to run accreditation of the state board. So just to kind of understand, if we say, yes, we want to move forward with seeking that recommendation, we can do so, but there would be some fiscal impact of that change. So I'm going to stop there with recommendation one, with kind of replacing our external partnership with internal accreditation at the state level for our local school districts and charters. Discussion or questions?
Okay, no, great. That was really helpful. And I think it's important to remember that if we move this recommendation, we're just moving for more information and for some problem solving on that recommendation. We don't have to finalize details now. So I think I saw Board Member Hansen's hand up first. Go ahead.
Thanks. Just wondering about this one, if there's what the primary reasons for making this recommendation would be. Is there a business case that's been established that shows we're going to save a lot of money? I can imagine that by USB doing the accreditation, we would gather a lot of knowledge because we'd understand the state of the schools, and I can see an advantage there. But are there other considerations that were made? And I am interested in knowing what the business case looks like. Do we think we can do it cheaper than outside companies?
Absolutely. So great question. So at this point, there has been a business case proposed because it would, depending on which route you all choose in committee and full board, would do a fiscal request. So from the council's point of view, they see a lot of benefits of bringing it internal. One, it can be more closely aligned with our local initiatives, programs, and projects, and really monitor the things that we value as a state, where with an external national provider, it's a little more blanket approach than this kind of explicit connections to Utah. Additionally, they have been kind of forced, might be a heavy word, but they've been having to recruit the evaluation teams and pay for people coming in from out of state, for example. And so the cost is pretty significant. For the annual cost of just keeping your accreditation, it's $1,200. Not a huge bite, but when you go through the actual accreditation process, like I said, for Davis, it was $140,000 for them to accredit their system. That's a pretty big lift that is not currently funded at all at the state level. It's all on the locals to do. And so by bringing it in-house, the cost, we can still have people participate locally, have a kind of network of professionals that when the school says, you know what, we're really interested in improving our early college program, who on the list has expertise in that area, and then we as the state can help leverage our experts across the state to help that school advance their early college. So they really see this kind of value of people who are in the state, who really know Utah, know our constraints and our our grant abilities can come and leverage that expertise in their local community in a way that the current process doesn't afford for as much. Although they have shared, there is value from hearing from other states too, but more local consistency and stories seem to be more applicable and helpful in advancing their practice with how the council kind of discussed this. So as we look at the cost, there is a cost associated. There's about $4,000 to $5,000 to pay for the team. You have to pay for subs to go get trained. It is a costly adventure. When I looked at some documents that we had shared previously, in talking about accreditation a few years ago, that only represented the annual cost. It didn't represent the actual accreditation year. That accreditation year, you're probably looking more at 10 to 12,000 for a single school to be able to go through accreditation. Which would lead me into the second approach, but we're not going to go there yet.
I'm like, whoa.
So, yeah, we're going to stay in a number one. So, Board Member Hanson, does that help give some idea of the benefits? The cost should be reduced because we don't need to bring in external folks. We can leverage our local expertise here. And so there would be reduced costs there. Plus, if you can imagine, it costs us about $170,000 for a specialist at the State Board of Education. Davis paid $140,000 just for their school district. So from a cost savings point, there should be cost savings all around. From this should be a reduced cost to the LEAs. If we don't want to seek a fiscal note from the legislature, we can just have the LEAs paying the fee to USBE for accreditation like they do Cognia. So it just depends on how far the board wants to go with the money aspect of it, but it would be a reduced cost for LEAs either way.
Board Member Hanson, do you have a follow-up or?
I do. I just wondered, has there been a pro forma on the business case produced? Do we actually put numbers to paper? Conceptually, I can see that there should be some savings. I just wondered, has someone put that to paper before making this recommendation?
I didn't want to head down the path too deeply until you all shared some motivation to move in this direction, just for the futile that it might be. And so I'd be happy to do that and bring it even for next board meeting. And you can always retract your recommendation or we can extend and say, we'll bring back that information so we can really understand. It was really my hesitation to not get too far down the path if the board had no interest in taking over accreditation at the state level.
Right. To clarify, we can make the recommendation. It doesn't mean we can't change your minds later. This is for you to do the very things that Board Member Hanson's talking about.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Well, but the question is, would it come back to us or would it go forward to the board, I guess?
Would the information come back to us, Jennifer?
I would propose we would bring it back to you as the Standards and Assessment Committee, and then you all would make those decisions to refer on to the full board.
Okay.
Okay. One more follow-up.
Okay, go ahead.
So these accreditations, are they required by anyone outside of the state of Utah? So are any federal dollars based on our accreditations, or is there any outside entity besides the legislature that's requiring this?
Generally, the answer would be no. There are a few. So like NCAA won't take credits from a non-accredited high school. So there are a few scholarship type associations and such that require that your credits come from an accredited school. But other than that, there is no ties to having to have accreditation.
Okay. I asked that because in some ways we maybe, in other people's eyes, devalue our accreditation if we do it in-house by a Utah entity instead of an independent outside entity. I'm not saying that USBE wouldn't be independent, but may look that way outside. But it sounds like that's not a problem then. We don't foresee any issues with that.
There's a number of states, and I can bring you the list that actually do their own accreditation across the country. So I could share with you the number of states that do like a partnership, the number of states that do it on their own, and the number of states that kind of have a choice for their LEAs, whether they want to go with the external partner or the state model. For example, Wyoming transitioned to them being over accreditation a couple of years ago, and they had 3 LEAs that said, you know what, we're going to stick with Cognia. We like what they have to offer. After the first year, they all switched over. They saw the success of the state model, and so now I think they have 1 outlier, and the other 2 have transitioned to the state model. But I can definitely bring that data back next time if you're interested to know the number of states kind of engaging in the different types of accreditation process.
That would be great. I appreciate the information. This sounds like a good way to go to me, and I think this is a great direction.
Yeah, thank you for those questions. And again, if we pass this, that's information that Jennifer, you already know, but you could get more information to share with us. And then I just want to say from a local teacher perspective, the authenticity of having it be in our state would do wonders for teacher buy-in. I just know that from personal experience as someone who's gone through accreditation, and I love the idea of being able to tie it to, align it with our Utah standards, with people who know what's going on in Utah. So thank you for those answers and those questions. Board Member Earl, questions on recommendation number 1?
Yeah, I guess I would like to see us have the option of either in-state or, doing it ourselves or still allowing others to do it. I get concerned when we're not involving an independent entity in something like this. It's kind of like the same with research, right? You have outside entities evaluate research to make sure it's legitimate. So you're not just endorsing yourself, so to speak. So not that I'm not suggesting bias there, but there's sometimes inherent problems with deciding, yeah, okay, I'll ask my neighbor if they like what I'm doing too, kind of a thing. And I'm not, once again, that's a little simplified, but when you get someone from the outside, there are some significant benefits to that. And then what were you saying about NCAA, that this would or wouldn't be qualified with that?
So they just require that you are an accredited high school. They don't mind which way you become accredited.
Oh, okay.
You have to be accredited.
Okay. I was going to say, I know that is a huge...
Something we want to keep in the happy.
Yeah. I wanted to make sure I understood what was said there, not implying that wouldn't be part of the accreditation or whatever, meeting their requirements. So,
and to speak to your point, Board Member Earl, one of the reasons that the group, because we talked about giving people the option of being able to choose the external partner or the local, and ultimately they landed on just make it the state. Because I was like, well, we could do the Wyoming model where they get to choose. I don't have any desire that everyone has to be under one system, but the group really felt passionately about that the state could provide a greater opportunity, especially from like an audit standpoint. A lot of times, some of the data they have to provide for their accreditation is data that we already have at the state level. And so we can help support them in having to collect less data. And rather than the collection process of it, we can have them do more work with actually analyzing it and interpreting it and making actions, rather than a lot of time is spent for accreditation just gathering everything. Mm-hmm. And so that would be one of the additional benefits of state accreditation is we know if they can pass their counseling audit. We know if they pass their special education audit. And we can bring that light to their accreditation process without the heavy lift of them acquiring all of that information.
Okay. So are you saying you're going to bring us several different models throughout the state, or throughout the nation, you said?
Yeah, so I'll bring you kind of a tabulated and then what that type of model looks like. So like if it's state only, if it's a blend, or if it's only a private provider, so you guys can kind of see the different models across the country.
Okay, I think I'd like to look at that sooner than later.
Yeah, I've got it already, so I can send it to you guys soon if you're interested. I can send it sooner than the next board meeting even.
That would be great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Jenny, for those questions and those concerns. I agree. I just, again, as a teacher, nothing's valuable unless we think it matters. And this feels like just such a better approach to me. Board Member Cannon.
Thank you. I would like to look at the information Jennifer has volunteered to send to us as well, because my initial reaction to this is, why go through all this? We're just accrediting ourselves. And I thought accreditation was really having the value of having an outside entity come in and take a look and verify, the worth of what you're doing and so forth. So accrediting yourself seems a little murky in my mind. I don't know what to do about the funding and that kind of thing. Let me just ask you to verify this. I understand that secondary schools in the state all need to be accredited. Elementary schools do not have to be accredited. Is that correct?
Board member or chair, may I speak to
Yes,
that?
go ahead. Yeah.
So board member Cannon, yes, currently it's our 9 through 12. So if you have a junior high with a 9th grade, you need to be accredited, and anything with 9 through 12. So if you're a middle school, 6 through 8, no accreditation is needed, as well as elementary. That's actually a future discussion with the advisory council, is if we want to do a K-12 accreditation or stick to our current model of secondary focused high school accreditation related to this. So that will actually be a future recommendation that the council is going to be discussing and bringing to this committee for your review and suggestion around that idea. Current practice is 9 through 12.
Okay. Then also, when charter schools were starting up, and I was the liaison on the charter school board, I really admired they had a movement there that every charter school would be accredited. And I know at that time, as they were beginning, all of their schools became accredited. Is that still the case? Are all the charters accredited, even those that are elementaries?
I don't believe so. I think that practice has dropped off.
Okay, thank you. I know it was something I really admired the charter school board doing, because I thought that if I were a parent looking at sending my child to a school and I knew it was accredited, that would be a positive point in my mind. So anyway, I worry about bringing it in state, because I feel like that only gives us a provincial view of what we're doing, and it limits the scope of the kind of input we could get from accreditation. So just some thoughts.
Yeah, thank you for that, Board Member Cannon. I just want to think out loud for a minute, because I'm thinking to myself, because I'm really personalizing to my experience. And when I think about the purpose of accreditation, which I love that was defined in that the AAC board defined that for continuous improvement. And so I see accreditation more as a formative kind of test rather than like a summative. And for so long, I feel like teachers, I mean, I will tell you, when we do accreditation, we disrupt the school for a year. We do these things, we pass, I hate to say this, and this is just from maybe my perspective, we leave it alone and then we don't continue with it. And so it loses its authenticity. And in a sense, each school or each district kind of looks at the state as outside. I mean, I've learned that that's not necessarily true all the time now that I've been kind of more involved. But I think, who has our best interests at heart? We want good education systems. And so I think when you realize who has a stake in the game, our state does. And so there's those things to consider. But for me, I want it to be a formative and ongoing process of continuous improvement. I don't want it to be just like this summative test that I'm checking off and not going to get back to because nobody has kind of buy-in. But as a state, if we all have buy-in, it changes the game a little bit. One thing I want to say is that we could make these recommendations, and I don't know, Jennifer, correct me if I'm wrong. We could pass the recommendations and then have them come back next week with more, or not next week, oh heavens, have them come back next month if we have time for more discussion. But if we at least pass them, we can get the more information going about them, right? Jennifer?
Can't we just request, Chair, could we not just request more information? We have to pass these to get more info, or can we just request more info and bring it back next month?
Let me just ask that. That in a sense, that's kind of what I see that we need to do. That's all we need to do, right? Is just request. That's what we're doing. Jennifer, help me out here.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we wanted to say, go ahead and continue to entertain these ideas, and here's some additional information that we need as a board to feel more confident and comfortable in our decision making, happy to do that. The reason we're coming in August to give us enough time to have a business case and all of those pieces. It was difficult for me to submit a business case, not knowing where you all were in this. And so we, submitted, yes, but is it really where we want it to be is definitely still open for interpretation. And so this is helpful to me as staff to be able to say, okay, here are the decision points or the data points that board members feel they need to be able to make these recommendations. So happy to I've just been taking notes on the pieces that we're curious about, and I can bring that back next time for more of a final decision point moving forward, knowing that this will be, okay, if we say state takes it over, then I would come back with, okay, here's what that looks like, right? So, and if we're okay with me entertaining that, I can bring that in September. I didn't define how many staff we would need, those kinds of pieces yet, because I don't like to go down rabbit holes that are not going to be filled in, I guess would be the way to say it. So just wanted to kind of see the board's appetite for this discussion, and happy to kind of exhaust more energies into the space if there is desire to at least entertain the concept, and then we can move forward with clearer direction in September.
Yeah, that really helps. And committee, your discussion is so great because it's helping inform Jennifer at the data points, like she says, and what holes she actually should crawl down a little bit. So yes, thank you for that. And then I also think this would put it on the superintendent's radar, and then you would be getting some feedback from that place as well. So let's see, Board Member Marsh, I think you were next.
Thank you, Chair Gravitt. I'm not as concerned about the being in-house in the state. I actually think that's to our advantage. I trust ourselves as a state educational body to do what's right for the state and what's best for kids. I don't think it's going to be an easy, let's just let them slide through process, because we're over a lot of compliance of different aspects of education in the state. And we seem to trust ourselves there. I don't know why we wouldn't trust ourselves with our accreditation. Something that I see with our accreditation coming in state, to what you said, Jennifer, is about continual improvement. If we go through that process and then you drop it and you wait for 3 or 5 or whatever your time period is, and then you hit it again, rather than that, if it's in-house, I think we'd have more of an open discussion to where we would have further our conversation, have more robust learning for the districts on how to improve, what they need to change if there are improvements there, or ones that the state can share best practices that are found in other districts to help districts who are maybe struggling with something. So I don't mind that part, but I think this would be a good move myself.
Thank you for that perspective. Board Member Earl?
Yeah, I guess in my mind, because I'm trying to think through all this right now, is that I don't necessarily see this as a lack of trust of ourselves, but sometimes there's an inherent blindness that happens. Not that it's intentional, but it's just because we're used to doing things a certain way, and sometimes we don't. And I think that's where the independent entity comes in. And I'm wondering if there's some kind of a blended approach, because I can see what you're saying as far as Board Member Gravitt, as far as saying, well, they wouldn't be familiar with our strategic plan or the direction our state's going, that kind of a thing. So I'm curious if there's some way to contract with someone for elements of this, but at the same time, something that's beneficial, a state element to the credentialing or accreditation. Anyway, I don't know. It's maybe something to consider, just because then we still have that independent voice, but we also allow for those key priorities of our state. So I don't know, something to think about. We can get creative, right? If we're the ones making the decision, then we get to do what we want to do, meaning that we coordinate together and we come up with something that's good for all of us. So anyways, I don't know, just some thoughts there.
Yeah, thank you. Excellent points, everyone. I think Superintendent Dixon, she's either waving or she wants to say something.
Good morning, everybody. It's been nice to just listen in this morning. And I love the conversations of this committee. I'm old enough that I've been around since, well, probably not before accreditation was developed, but I remember when the state was in charge of accreditation. And it was, we've always been in charge of it, but in terms of an independent look at it. And we just didn't have enough personnel. And I think that was part of the challenge. But going back to Board Member Gravitt's point, it was a very formative process the more the board gave that away to other entities, it became more about the rating and a little bit more busy work. And we actually, I remember being at Murray High and being accredited, and that was a time when they were checking off how many books you had, and it was just like this checklist, and it was so much work and not helpful. And then I was actually part of a statewide committee that Patty Harrington brought together that reformed it and brought in, we had teams, and they were really robust, and there was a ton of training. So we have always kind of had this very broad role in training accreditation teams. Then again, we had another iteration, as Jennifer so aptly described, that put that totally out to another entity, mainly because we didn't have the resources. And it feels very disconnected from our schools. So moving back to a more connected, formative place. I appreciate what Board Member Earl said. And I think there are a lot of good outside resources that you would use in the process. So professional learning resources, rubrics, all of those kinds of tools, there are a lot of them out there. The benefit would also be, as Board Member Hanson described, and that's really getting in and understanding where the schools are at. And then I think that would help inform your work, because we would have very specific examples as a variety of rules came up. So personally, I'm excited about the direction, just watching now 4 decades of iterations of accreditation that have tried to move from check boxes and a lot of work to one of continuous improvement.
Yes.
And while that's over the last decade or so, I would say that's been the way. Really getting in and helping teachers and principals, helping schools own their own improvement process, and acting as a facilitator and a guide, I think is a much more helpful approach. So just starting the conversation with you all and seeing that your interest is helpful, and then we can bring a variety of options back to you for you to steer the direction you'd like this to go. So I think this is a good first step. So thank you for entertaining it.
Oh, thank you so much, Superintendent. And I think I go back to, I love all of the comments we've heard, but when I think about myself in a classroom or in a school, I just want, there's a lot of money and I want it to matter. And I've seen it, right or for wrong, this is just honest, I've seen it not really matter, it become busy work, and I don't want that. We put a lot of energy into it. And so I love the creativity and the ideas. Let's get something that really matters and really does help us improve as practitioners. So do we have any other questions about recommendation 1, or does somebody want to make a motion about recommendation 1, whether we bring it back next why do I keep saying that, next month to committee, or whether we forward it to the board? Is somebody willing to make that motion?
Chair, I'll move that we bring recommendation 1 back to the committee the next time we meet to consider additional information as discussed.
Okay, so we have a motion before the committee, and that is to move recommendation 1 to consider more information. Do we have any discussion to that motion? Okay, all those in favor, go ahead and vote, or just go ahead and vote. Okay, that motion carries unanimously. So Nora Lee, did you get that? It's just to bring recommendation for the state to become the accrediting body, to bring that back to committee for further discussion and to consider examples.
Yes.
Okay. Jennifer, do you want to go ahead and talk about recommendation number 2 now?
Absolutely. So recommendation number 2 is to approach accreditation from a systems lens instead of per school. So currently, most accreditation processes in our state have been going at the school level. The current trend is moving to systems. So Davis was kind of the first one to look at it from a systems point. They accredited all 90 of their schools. So they actually went above what the board rule is of 9 through 12 and did their elementaries, their middle schools, their whole system. And so the discussion was pretty robust around this one as well, as you can imagine, as it's a shift from current practice. As the groups discussed and kind of worked through this as, do we do systems? Do we do school? Do we allow people to choose? The difficulty with doing school at the state level is the amount of fiscal resources you would need to be able to do 600 schools versus having to do 168 systems. And so a system may be a school in a single charter. A system may be the 90 schools in Davis. And so as the groups discussed and those that have been through systems accreditation, I believe Canyons is going through systems right now. A lot of LEAs are moving towards systems because of the benefit that it adds to really saying, what about our system is creating the supports? What about our system is creating the breakdowns? It also lightens the load for individual schools in terms of pulling data, for example, because the system is pulling that data for all of their schools. So it's not that individual schools aren't looked at and information provided, but it's really about how can the system improve so that all of the schools kind of get to have that advantage. Additionally, things such as like our accountability system within this kind of state system accreditation, you can really start to make these connections to our local accountability metrics, to our local comprehensive needs assessments that we'll be working on and helping people to see all of our ability to be cohesive instead of these individual standalone silos. And so the systems accreditation really allows for this big picture that still it looks at continuous improvement, but it's at the systems level that then helps the schools to achieve. So you can imagine as each school is working to achieve their different pieces, there are parts of the system that if were enhanced could improve those schools as well. And that's where, if you'd like, I can definitely have Davis come and speak if you want more information about what systems did for them compared to individual school accreditation. Next time, Logan Toon or Patty Brown, I'm sure would be happy to come talk, or Suzanne, about their systems experience, because they have been doing school accreditation for years, and then just recently went to systems and just found so much greater value in that. They were very persuasive with the advisory council in how much better that experience was and what it did for them, not only as a system, but as their schools and the continuous improvement and the work of getting it feedback and how to advance their practice. And really the purpose of accreditation with that standard of quality, what systems accreditation did for them versus the individual school accreditation. So that's kind of recommendation number 2. It would just mean that we would accredit the LEA, which means that their schools would be accredited by kind of register concurrently.
Thank you, Jennifer. I would love to hear from Davis School District to hear about that, because from what I can hear you say, I love the idea of cohesiveness, of the continuous improvement again, that it matters not just to one little silo, but we are all working together. I really like that approach. Board Member Earl.
Yeah, so my question becomes this. Davis is a large district. Systems would make sense because they have so many variables. In a smaller district or even a charter, does that become more cumbersome? I don't know. I'm just trying to think out loud here.
Great question.
Does it achieve the same thing, or is there a different way of approaching that?
Yeah, in a single school system, so we had, trying to remember, it's Daggett. We had the superintendent from Daggett on, and for him, he has one high school. So for him, systems is a school. And so they're equivalent in terms of what you would do. You're just not pulling the data for all of the schools and looking at each school as part of the system. The system in his space is a single school. Same with our charters that don't have multiple sites. Systems is equivalent to school, so they're not going to see any difference. It's our LEAs with multiple schools in their system that would see the benefit of the reduced burden associated with accreditation, but also the value of being able to look at their system and how can the system better work to serve their schools more effectively and efficiently.
Okay, so it's okay. Okay, well, it would be good to have Davis come and, or a couple of them, to share what that looks like, just so modeling, we may have a better idea of how it impacts their school communities. So thank you.
Board Member Hanson.
Thanks. And I, on this one, I can really see the value of auditing the systems. I think that makes a lot of sense because those systems need to be operating well. It brings in, shows us how the LEA is functioning. But I am also really opposed to not doing school audits, because that's where as Chair Huntsman would say, the water gets to the end of the row. In schools that are operating, in districts that are operating now, we have failing schools that we are putting onto recovery programs. And their system might say that things are fine unless we somehow selected that one school for our audit to pull audit data from. We wouldn't pick that up in the accreditation. So if we wanted to go to a systems approach in addition to doing the per school audit, I would be really behind that. If we want to eliminate the per school audit, I think that we would have to go many years demonstrating that those systems are very functional before I'd be comfortable with that.
So let me add a little bit of detail on that. So the schools are still part of the process. The principals are still engaged. There's still happening at the school level. I can definitely have Davis and Canyon speak to what the school kind of influences versus the system. But do know in our current accreditation system, our LEAs get to choose right now. So some of them are choosing systems and some are choosing schools. So something for you to think through, Board Member Hanson, is if you don't want systems as an option, we would need to make that directive, because right now our schools already have this choice.
Chair Gravitt, may I say something?
Yes, I was going to ask if you would speak to that, Patty.
Yeah, so I was actually in Davis School District when we did the systems audit and the whole systems accreditation. And so the thing that speaks to your question, Board Member Hanson, is it's no longer the fact that a school can fail on their own. So for example, if you had a school that wasn't doing well and then you had another high school that was just rocking it, they had all the highest AP scores, no longer could that high school just say we are doing fine, but instead we have more cohesion by being able to the entire district, the entire LEA must be doing well. So it brought to the forefront where more teachers were working together and administrators working together to share best practices, because it became about all of us had to be above par or at par and no one could be left behind. And so that's the thing that we really appreciated by doing a systems accreditation.
Well, and Patty, just your comment in the chat really kind of speaks to Board Member Hanson's concern to me, because my experience with accreditation is that, you know, you're just this individual school, but a system approach takes into account those elementary schools, you know, the parts of the junior high school that maybe aren't being accredited necessarily, but it's more holistic, and it does almost allow more a deepening of looking at to what's going on. So thank you for that perspective. Board Member Hanson.
Well, I'm just listening now, but again, I do think I understand the systems approach. I'm really behind that. I think we need to do that. But I think that the individual schools, when we're talking about lessening the burden on them, I'm not behind that right now. I think individual schools should be feeling the heat, and we should go to the site and make sure that things are happening the way they should in those individual schools. There may be some point in the future where I would feel comfortable with that being okay, just auditing as a system. But as I understand what you're explaining, this systems audit would be conducted at the district level, and we wouldn't be making those visits to the individual schools where the people on site are feeling the heat and actually showing us and demonstrating the data and the things that need to be happening there. So that's just my feeling. There may be others that have different opinions, but just from corporate experience, on financial audits, they would never do a financial audit just on the home office. They would always go to satellite offices and make sure that things are being done correctly.
No, Board Member Hanson, I appreciate that. And that is an experience that you bring to us and you help us understand. And I just want to clarify for teachers and for my experience, we don't mind feeling the heat. What's frustrating to us, and I think to many districts or even schools, is to feel the heat with not a lot of benefit. Like, let us feel the heat, but let us do something that actually works for our district. Let's do something that actually makes a difference in helping us become better teachers, practitioners, etc. So bring the heat all you want, but let's do it right. Board Member Cannon.
I just will say that my feelings currently align with Board Member Hanson's. I guess I represent Murray District, and I could feel okay about doing a systems audit in Murray, but I also represent Granite District, and the disparity across Granite District is huge. And so that gives me very little faith in the benefit of a systems audit in that kind of scenario versus one in a Murray District scenario. And So I think there's real benefit to individual school audits, and that's where my feelings are at this point. Thank you.
No, thank you. All great points. I guess what we need to decide as a committee is whether or not we want more information, if we want staff to go down this through this lens of a systems lens. Do we want to have more information about that, or do we want to scrap it all together? So that's what we need to decide as a committee. Do we want it brought to the full board? Do we want it brought back to committee for further discussion with feedback from other districts? What do we as a committee want staff to do? So just keep that in mind, and we would be looking for a recommendation from this committee for that.
And Jenny, if I can,
yeah, go ahead, Scott.
I have my hand up for too long. I need to put it down and put it up
sorry.
again.
I thought you were waving.
No, that's okay. I just left it up, and that's a problem for you.
No, action's good.
I'd be happy again if the framework was to add a systems audit to, or a systems accreditation to our program, with the intent of in the future possibly being able to eliminate the per school. I'd be happy to entertain that and hear more information on that. Right now, to say just go to a system type audit or a system type accreditation, I wouldn't be behind that. So I don't know what the rest of the members of the committee feel, but I'd be happy to make that motion.
Well, I'm getting the sense that that's where people are. I mean, it doesn't sound like people want to flat out say, let's move to a systems approach, which is not what I think we would be doing. But it sounds like we may be interested in hearing more about it. Is that what you are all saying? Well, Jenny put a check mark, so I'm guessing that's yes.
Yes.
Thank you, Jenny. So does somebody want to make a motion for whether they want this to come back to committee, whether they want this to go to the full board, but regardless, just make a recommendation that we want more information about this lens. Board Member Earl, thank you.
Yes, I'd like to make a recommendation that recommendation number 2 come back for additional information, and maybe even if we wanted to invite some personnel that are involved with this to our personnel, districts, that they can share what they've seen and experienced. So.
And you mean come back to committee, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so the motion before the committee is that we move recommendation number 2 to come back to committee with further information and with words from districts and examples to help us understand more. Something like that. Do we have any discussion to that motion? Okay, all of those in favor, go ahead and vote now on that one. Okay, that recommendation passes, that motion passes, and it's just to have recommendation 2 come back to committee with further discussion and further thought and information. Good, Jennifer?
Absolutely.
Okay. Oh, what else are you going to say? Nah. Okay. You should try it sometime and just see what we do. Okay, maybe on the next one. Okay, let's take recommendation number 3.
All right, recommendation number 3 is basically it's a continuation with a modification. So accreditation currently evaluates some compliance efforts as well as continuous improvement, or at least metrics to help towards continuous improvement. With this recommendation, what the council is recommending is that USBE as the state entity, again, if we are the accrediting body, that we would help to provide the data required for some of those compliance elements. And compliance would be part of your accreditation, that if you're not meeting compliance in your audits for finance or transportation or whatever, that would still be part of your accreditation process, but the data would be facilitated by USBE. So it's data that we already collect, we already gather, we already have. And instead of the LEAs and schools having to pull that data, we would bring it as part of our compendium of review to the discussion as part of evaluation for accreditation. So that is the recommendation and what that one means. That one's probably, at least my perspective, an easier one to say yes to, but maybe there are some questions.
committee, what questions or discussion items do you want to chat about for recommendation 3? I'm not seeing anything, but yes, I do. Board Member Earl.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to understand, make sure that continuous improvement is recommendations they're making, or it's goals that a school has set and they're showing how they're moving along that continuum. What specifically?
Yeah, absolutely. So Board Member Earl, specifically, this really gets into, there's some elements that we would be evaluating as part of the evaluation process, from leadership at the board and school level, to instructional practices, down to counseling supports and early college resources, interventions, all of that. So when we look at accreditation, there's a number of measures, and that's something that the council will be bringing forward after our September meeting, is like, what would we actually evaluate when we look at accreditation? And so we've got some basic elements started to put together, but as the council, we need to kind of dig into more and describing what those are. But those would be the things that would drive. So generally it's around leadership, instruction, assessment, accountability. Those pieces are all part of an accreditation process. And so those would be the drivers of those continuous improvement efforts, those specific elements that we would define in a future board discussion. There's a lot of pieces to this. So I'm bringing you like the big grain size, and we'll keep kind of narrowing down into more and more finite elements as we move along, but not knowing what the board wants to do. Getting too far down the line didn't make a lot of sense. As we got through these decision points, it seemed most appropriate to come to you all to see if we should continue down this pathway, because if there was no appetite for it, I can dispel the advisory council and we could stop entertaining these ideas. So that's hopefully answers your question and a little bit more.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you.
I appreciate that this goes back to the intent of accreditation. So I like that they tied it back there. I think I heard somebody else has a question or comment. Let's see. Did somebody else try to speak and I cut them off? And I'll just keep speaking.
I said thank you. So sorry.
Okay. No, you're great. I'm sorry I cut in. Do we have any other questions about this component or this recommendation? And if not, we need to decide, do we want this one? Do we want more information about this? As Jennifer said, do we have an appetite for this? Do we want to even consider this, or do we want to scrap it all together? Board Member Cannon.
I could see that there could be some real value in this. First of all, it says to evaluate compliance. And our committee has dealt with the assurances document, which is a huge document. And many of the things on that document are important to us, but they just get a check mark by the LEAs. And so I could see this being a valuable look at what compliance means. And of course, we're always interested in continuous improvement. If you'd like, I'd be happy to make a motion to request additional information come back to the committee on recommendation 3.
Okay, so we want this one to come to committee too. Okay, so the motion before the committee is to bring recommendation 3 back to committee with more information. Do we have any discussion to that motion? Okay, seeing none, go ahead and vote on that one. Okay, that motion passes. So to restate it all, we are asking that staff bring recommendations 1, 2, and 3 back to committee for further discussion. It sounds like we are interested in these approaches, but we have some hesitation and want to learn more things and maybe have some information from LEAs like Davis on number 2, et cetera. Nora Lee, you have that?
I do.
Okay, and then Jennifer, do you have what you need?
Yeah, so for recommendation 3, likely would have to be more October. We don't meet again as a council until the middle of September. I wouldn't be able to come up with explicitly what compliance might look like without their guidance. And so if you all don't mind, we can point to 1 and 2 in September, and then likely to bring recommendation 3 back in October.
Okay. Does anyone have a problem with that? I mean, I don't think we have a choice in that one. So
I'm just trying not to bother them during the first month of school. Is kind of
yes, and this would be a particularly bad year to bother them. I don't even like first week. Okay, don't talk to me. Okay, well, with that, Jennifer, thank you so much for wading through this with us. Committee, thank you so much for your discussion, and we will look forward to more discussion about this.
Thanks for the
solving
opportunity.
all the problems of accreditation. Okay, so committee, just want you to make note of the time. We have 2 items left to discuss, and they could potentially be pretty big discussion items, but we have about 40 minutes to discuss those. So just keep in mind that if you spend more than 20 minutes on one, you're going to cut down on the other one. So you kind of decide where you want to put that energy. We for sure need to deal with our action item first, however. So let's go to item number 7, which is school mental health screening program. And this is an action item that has taken tons of work. And so, Christy, who's going to direct on this one? Is it Scott?
I'll start.
Oh, Christy, okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. Will you tell us about this and help us understand what we're going to be voting for?
Yes, absolutely. So Christy Walker, Safe and Healthy Schools Coordinator at the Utah State Board of Education. We're really excited to be here today. There's so much conversation and work that's been happening around the realm of mental health. And so just a growing understanding of how mental health is a journey and not a destination, how it's fluid. And what we're going to talk about today really helps students give a voice as to their current mental health condition. And this bill that we're going to talk about, it really helps create parameters around having those conversations and doing it with the guidelines and support needed from the Utah State Board of Education. And so today we're going to talk about the school mental health screening program from House Bill 323 of the 2020 legislative session. This legislation requires that the State Board of Education work collaboratively with the Division of Substance Abuse and Mental Health to create 2 lists. So one list is the list of screening tools that have been approved by the board. And the second list is the mental health conditions in which it is approved that LEAs screen for. And so these 2 lists, it did take a ton of work, a lot of heart and soul effort here to compile these. At this point, I'd like to turn your attention to the beautiful 1-pager in our backup document. So, yes, it's gorgeous. Our Barbara is fantastic. And so the data that was gathered to really compile information that's happening across the state is represented here. We have the school safety survey and current screening practices survey that shows us about 2/3 of our LEAs are currently conducting mental health screenings in some form. About 2/3 of those that are doing mental health screenings report that they do them individually. And then about 17% of those are doing mental health screening nights. You can see this is something that's already happening. But again, what we're doing today will help create guidelines and supports for that. The 3 most screened for mental health conditions are suicide, anxiety, and depression. You can see that suicide is heads above the rest as a concern. Very likely because it's still the leading cause of death for our youth ages 10 to 17. And then on current implementation on the back side, you can see that LEAs really are very invested in this practice. They really do see it as something to put to gauge, kind of get a pulse on what's happening with a student. And then from there, take that information and provide the appropriate interventions. And so the list that you see in backup docs today, as far as the screening tools list and the mental health conditions list, they are hinged. I'll let our Division of Substance Abuse and Mental Health liaison Scott Ayers speak to that and walk you through what really how they're comprised. And so first of all, I think it's important we talk about the definition of screening and what that means and how it's different from assessment and diagnosis. Those definitions are on your one-pager for your reference, but I think those three things are really foundational to the rest of this conversation. And so, Scott, I'll turn the time over to you.
Sure. Thank you, Christy. Scott Ayers, Division of Substance Abuse and Mental Health. Yes, there is a lot. I'll echo what Christy said. This is a really complex topic and requires a lot of collaborative work to take place. And we've seen that, and it's reflected not only in this list, but in the work that we will be moving forward with throughout the state. We've seen that there's been some confusion in what a screening actually is. I just want to clarify that screening is a process for evaluating the presence of a possible problem. This doesn't mean that there is a problem. It's not a diagnosis tool of any way. And to speak in terms of COVID, it would be like getting your temperature checked. And if your temperature is a little elevated, that doesn't mean you have COVID. But it does mean that it's something that you might want to pay attention to, because if there's other symptoms related, other data points, then we might want to look at maybe a fuller, more in-depth assessment. So when we do talk about screening, we really are talking about those first steps and discovering what exists or to what degree it exists. The list itself, the screening tool list itself, again, was a collaborative effort that was not only a survey put out to the LEAs, but we also reached out to our local mental health authorities, as well as other key stakeholders, really being in communication with them throughout the state, with the goal that we wanted to put together the most comprehensive evidence-based list of tools that our locals could choose from, that we could offer a menu of options, so to speak, and that really the decisions made on that local level rather than the state saying that this is what you have to do. Again, we know that there's practices already in place, and we applaud the efforts. We've been able to find a lot of really good work being done throughout the state. But it's also important to remember that these lists of tools are just that. They are tools with a wide variety of preferences for those that choose to use them. And again, we wanted to allow the most control that we could to remain within the local level. Also, the list at the top level, or the top row, there are some specific items that are in bold and highlighted in blue. Those items come directly from the rule that is the information that the board has requested. So the name and age, or the name of the screening tool that is being used, the age and grade for which it is evidence-based proven to be used for, the conditions the screening tool detects, supporting evidence-based research, any limitations or false positives, as well as a link to the website. And like Christy said, these two documents, both the mental health conditions and the list itself, are somewhat married together. So impacting or having decisions made with one will impact the other. The other thing that I think, maybe the last point that I'll make before I hand back to Christy, is that we chose to define the conditions used on this list. We defined those through the Merriam-Webster dictionary. And the reason we did that, the rationale behind that, was that these definitions, they do provide a better description of what the screening tool is actually looking for and actually detecting. We were considering defining these with the DSM-5, which either does not define them at all within the book, or the definitions are clinical in nature and diagnostic and speak in parameters of criteria in order to diagnose somebody for that particular condition. So we just wanted to make sure that we were very clear that that was intentional, and that's why we built it the way that we did. So, and I will now defer to Christy and any other questions that the board might have.
Board Member Gravitz, if I may.
Yeah.
I'm in with one thing. So in reviewing some of the links and things on the screening tools list, there were a couple of things that we as staff felt like needed to be updated. And so we are currently creating a PDF of those updates and can send them along to the committee as soon as those are available.
Oh, excellent. I was going to ask about that. And then thank you, Scott, for addressing the definitions. I wondered that too, like, why aren't we using the DSM? But this makes more sense for the purpose of a screener. And I love the comparison of just, it's getting your temperature taken. We're not diagnosing like the DSM would. We are simply screening. So thank you both for that background and information, and for kind of framing the discussion. Board Member Hanson, you have a question?
I do, thanks. So looking at the list that you've compiled, the screening tool list, I was frankly surprised to see so many different tools on a list that I assume are approved by USB. It looks like that's the intent, is to provide a list of USB approved tools. I wondered, and you said you wanted to leave as much control with the local entities as possible. I'd like to hear a little bit more about that, about why we wouldn't want to be more consistent in the approaches we use across the state, and maybe have more consistent results or consistent data coming into us. Also on this list, I see there's one at least that said no evidence base, or found only one study supporting this is the Burns Anxiety Inventory. So it doesn't have a yes. There's another one that says none found on evidence-based. On the limitations, we have one that says several factors contribute to invalid results, including wrong sex, wrong date of birth. We have some limitations listed on some of these that seem to be fairly serious limitations. I just wondered what the criteria was for having these be accepted and on our list. And can you walk me through kind of the thought process and how we put this together?
Scott, do you want to take that one, or Christy?
Certainly, Chair. May I speak to that?
Yes, please.
Yeah, really, really good questions. And I will start by saying there's just so many tools out there, and it's hard to know which we want to add to the list. So we started simply by taking the survey and reaching out to our experts throughout the state to find out what was already in use and that they've found to be effective. So this is a result of that. Those lists, or the tools themselves, made it to that list through those means, rather than us just deciding what works and what doesn't. Also, we wanted to speak very candidly to these lists. If there was limitations or limiting factors, we wanted to be transparent with that and show what the research has said those things to be. Now, just because there's a limiting factor, or that there are pieces of those limitations, such as relies on self-report or implicit bias may emerge, does not mean that those are inherently bad tools. But what they do mean is that we need to consider those either when using them or in our training pieces as we move forward. The evidence-based data was collected, and I won't speak directly to that process of unless you would like me to. But what I will say is that if there was no data, if there was no evidence-based research that could be found, I did make sure that that was highlighted in there so that the board understood that this was a tool that potentially was being utilized, maybe somewhere within our systems right now, but that I could not speak to that, or that our team could not speak to that from an evidence-based perspective. I'll pause there and see, Board Member Hanson, if I've answered your questions.
Scott, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So if I understand correctly, this is just a list of the tools that are currently in use within Utah. And I understood it to be a list of tools that are approved by USBE. Is it that as well? Are these approved for use then by USBE, or is that not the intent of the list?
Christy?
Yeah, Chair Gravitt, if I may.
Yeah.
So this list is needing to be approved by the board. So right now, if there are tools that are listed that are questionable or don't seem likely for us to put on this list, then now is the time to remove those. So this is meant to be a list that is posted every year. And so it'll come up for review by the board yearly. And so if an LEA happens to choose a tool that is not on the list, it's also currently in board rule that they need to submit quite a bit of information in order for us to approve that they use that tool that is not on the list. So there's some safeguards in place there as far as them using something that's not necessarily evidence-based or proved to be effective.
Can I follow up?
Yeah, go ahead, follow up.
Yeah, so have we looked at, so if a school wants to use a screening tool that's not on the list, then we require them to submit a bunch of information, you said, to make sure, so that we can analyze that tool and make sure it's okay. Have we looked at all of that information for each of these tools that's on the list? Have we done that check for the ones that are on the list right now? Gone through each of those criteria that we're requiring them to submit?
Correct.
Yes.
Board Member Hanson, this is Scott. Yes, correct. We have done that process. We've reached out to them in a way where we could gather that information now in advance to hopefully prevent this tying the hands, I guess, so to speak, of our folks that are really working hard in schools to provide screening tools. And should we have not added one, or should they have not replied, or if there's something that they have found to be better, or something that comes along, because this is a interesting time. We are learning more and more every day. Then that would have to be submitted through a process in order to make it to this list.
Okay, continuing. So I'm wondering what the thought process is then to have this approved list when on evidence-based data, which it looks like that's one of the criteria, we've got none or found only one study supporting the Spanish version, or none found on some of these, and they're still on our list for okay to use. Can you explain the rationale for that?
Certainly. And again, as this list is not a okay to use list from presenting it before the board, it's rather a list that we wanted to allow the board members to be able to see and decide what they would choose, rather than us be the arbiters of what makes the list or not. The list, specifically the Burns Depression checklist, where there is no evidence found, that has been around since I want to say the 70s. It is a tool that is quite frequently used. Excuse me, but I could not find any evidence-based data that supported the use of that tool, or any meta-analysis or independent research that spoke to that. Again, from a clinician standpoint, that does not necessarily mean that tool is inherently ineffective. It just means we were unable to find that as a requirement for this list?
In the interest of time, maybe I can make a motion.
Okay.
That'd be all right, Chair. I move that we ask staff to go back and look at this list and make recommendations to us as to which items should be left on the list, given the evidence-based data and limitations and other criteria that are in the rule, so that we can make a determination. I'm not a mental health professional, and I don't feel like I'm in a position to say this is a good one, this isn't. We're certainly relying on staff to go back and do that, but I'd really appreciate that recommendation before we move this on to the board. So that's my motion, is that we have staff go back and make recommendations to us as to which tools should remain on the list.
Scott, let me just clarify. I want to make sure I get this right. Could we make it, give them some stronger parameters? Like, could we say, have staff take off any that don't have evidence-based data for them? Or how do you want them to make that determination? I just want to make sure they know what their job is.
I would like them to look at the criteria that's in the rule for LEAs to submit a program that's not on the list. That's the stuff we would look at to determine whether the one that's proposed is okay or not. And then based on that criteria, to make recommendations as to whether they should stay on or not. We're going to do that process anyway. If an LEA says, hey, we want to use this tool, we're going to go through that process. So I want them to go through that process now.
Okay.
The ones that have been proposed.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure I understood. So the motion before the committee is to move the staff relook at all the resources, make sure they align with the criteria that is in the rule, and base their recommendations on that criteria. Is that correct?
You always say things much better than I do.
No, I didn't. I was like, crap, he should have said it again. Okay, so let me see if there is discussion to that motion. And I would also like to ask staff, because my question would be, didn't they do that anyway? So I don't know if staff can speak to that, Christy, because it seems to me like it feels like you did that, but maybe you didn't. So let me get some questions from the committee. And then also I see that our superintendent has a comment. So let me go to her first.
Actually, Chair Gravitt, I think your question is connected to mine. So maybe let staff address that and then I'll weigh in. Thank you.
Oh, you transported that to me. Okay, staff, go ahead.
I'll take that, Chair, if you don't mind.
Thank you, Scott. Appreciate that.
Yes. Your assumption is correct. That work has been done. In the spirit of transparency, I suppose, we've allowed the items that may have been requested by LEAs that are either in use or that they'd like to see in use added to the list. However, and maybe in hindsight, we should have just removed those to begin with, as those three items out of all of them, the three items on line 25, 26, and 30 are all tools that were suggested or brought to our attention and were not supported through evidence. Those would be probably recommended that they be removed, as they don't meet that expectation of evidence-based. But all the other items on that list that do say yes are supported by evidence-based data and have met the criteria.
Oh, that really helps me. Thank you. Superintendent, did you want to add to that? I see your hand still up.
Yes, just a little bit. So I think this is one of those process items where we have had legislation in the past that has asked for us to do this very thing, where the board supplies a list of approved items and staff has brought recommendations, and then the board has asked for them to be the recommenders. So in fairness to staff, I think they're doing exactly what they have been asked to do in prior committees and prior meetings, where they bring everything to you and provide you with criteria and what they would recommend, and then you would make that decision. So I think you can actually do that today right here in committee. And I say that because we have schools right now Murray, I know starts, let's see, we have Washington starting on the 13th, Murray on the 17th. So waiting until another board meeting is really too late. They're waiting for these screeners that they can use now because the money is available.
Okay, thank you. And I'm wondering, well, I have to frame it this way for myself too. I have to realize again what Christy was saying at the very beginning, that we are not diagnosing. These are almost, and then like Scott was saying, these are almost like brands of thermometers, you know? So I think the risk is a little bit less than if we were providing true diagnostic measures. Scott, I'm wondering if I could amend your motion to say that we approve all of the screeners except those that are not supported through evidence, the ones on lines 25, 26, and 30. That would be an amendment I would like to make to the motion if supported.
Sorry, yeah, if I can speak to your amendment.
Yes.
I don't know
please.
that I'm comfortable with that because I'm also looking on this list at the, and it keeps moving here, but we've got the limitations. Some of these relies on self-report. Maybe that limitation is acceptable, but I'd like to hear staff comment towards the several limitations. This is the Burns again. I guess maybe that one would be eliminated based on evidence-based, but there's limitations including validity and use with children on some of these. Implicit bias may emerge, no evidence found for discriminant validity on the Vanderbilt study. With those limitations, are we still okay with these being put forward? Again, I don't know how to interpret that just as a board member, and I can go in and do a lot of research and we can bring this back next month. But I'd like to hear from the people who are familiar with this, if these are study or tools that we want to have out there, if they would be approved, if they were submitted independently by an LEA for startup use.
Board Member Earl, I see you're waiting, and I'm so sorry, but I just want to see either have Scott or Christy address the issue that Board Member Hansen's asking, because I really want to. I think our LEAs are asking for this now, and I hesitate to move this to the next month because that's going to impact our LEAs. But please speak to that.
Certainly, and to try to be as brief and concise as possible. There are several factors that may come into play, specifically on line 20, the Macy, that should a person not fill in 10 or more of the questions, should they mark the wrong sex or the wrong date of birth as they move through the assessment, that relies on self-report data, that could be a misscore, so that it would be a limiting factor, not necessarily a false positive. In fact, the language of false positive was brought up in our earlier committee, which doesn't necessarily apply here. However, within limitations, the word limitations, certain things may limitate the factor or these tools. And so, speaking to your Vanderbilt on 27, just to be direct, when we look at that, this is stating that no evidence is found for discriminant validity, meaning that we do not use this or is not recommended that this be used other than for screening use only, rather than a diagnostic measure. And I understand the complexity of this and the language that surrounds this, but I do want board members to feel that they can understand what's being spoken to here, and also know that these things have been considered as we've moved through the work.
Okay, I want to get to Board Member Earl's question or concern, and then see if we can find a place of common ground here.
Yeah, I have several questions. Christy's already answered some of those, and some of those were along the lines of why we're using the dictionary to define these, and so the explanation was given here. And I know she said they're going to go back and check some of these, some of the evidence-based data, because sometimes when you click on it, like for example, there's one that takes you to the University of Utah, but it's just the sheet that says you have to have a code to get in. So it's not even accessible to be reading what the data is or the research is. So do you know what I mean? It's not usable. So you go to the link and it's not usable because you have to have a code to get in. But I think Christy said that she's working with that. So my question as we look at moving these forward is, are some of these used in clinical settings, and shouldn't those be set apart different than, no? It does say that, I think, on limited for clinical use. So these aren't numbered, but there's a depression one, an anxiety one. I just wonder if we want to separate those that are used clinically by a practitioner, someone who is specifically trained, and those that are more of a broad screener. It just seems like that would be an appropriate differentiation, right? I mean, you can use the same type of format, but just, these are more clinical usage, because we pulled from the Department of Mental Health as well as schools for this listing. And then I know these are intended for students. Are there also ones intended for adults, for teachers, that kind of a thing, for screening for mental health issues? So those are just a couple of questions I had. Any?
Thank you, Board Member Earl. Christy and Scott, could either of you address those? And while you're coming there, I think, Jenny, just to be fair to you, I think I was just nodding like no, because I was thinking in my brain, well, we'd be using them as screeners and not as a clinical diagnosis. So that's what my no was.
Yeah, you're okay. I was
talking to myself.
You're my vision. So
yeah, I'm sorry. I should turn my video off because I'm like having conversation with myself here. Okay. Scott or Christy, please speak to that.
Scott, I'll take this one for at least a portion considering the screening for adults. The legislation does not provide any directive for us to screen adults. However, it's kind of like by proxy, right? When we screen children, hopefully there's a little internal conversation happening where they're like, maybe. And it really is a part of the bigger conversation around mental wellness, like we mentioned. And so hopefully the use of the screening tools are also being somehow applied to adults, but that's not part of this approval process. It's not part of board rule or legislation. That's just coming from Christy Walker. So, and Scott, if you want to speak to the clinician portion of Board Member Earl's question.
Yeah, absolutely. Limited by clinical use, we do have clinicians within the walls of our schools, psychologists and social workers that may want to use that tool. However, I wouldn't recommend it for anyone outside of that. And that's really the only limiting factor for those clinical use items.
Okay.
Excuse me. Speaking to the evidence and the links, we also ran into that issue. Some of these research studies, you need specific access just to get into them. We've gone ahead and adjusted that. Christy has suggested we put that out and available to you through a draft 2. And so those are updated and much more user-friendly so that they are easier for you to access. And we've tried to, rather than have a website of any kind, link an actual research study that can be spoken to.
Excellent. Deputy Superintendent Patty Norman, would you speak to this, please?
Yes, thank you. We have heard from many LEAs who are very anxious to have these tools ready, especially right now during this time where they feel that students are even in more need, and just being able to have these tools ready. So I appreciate this conversation, and I'm wondering, Chair Gravitt, if we can move the SHARP survey till next month, because that is not time sensitive, so that we can work through these questions now and give it the 9 extra minutes that's needed. So that we can see what can be done to get this the discussion, the questions answered.
Thank you for that. And the other thing I'm thinking about out loud is that if we move these forward, it doesn't mean we can't go back and revisit. When can we revisit these? Is it once a year? I know you said at the beginning, I can't remember if it was once a year or if we can do that sooner than yearly.
These are revisited once a year, but we can revisit them sooner. We can also have staff bring information to the board in between now and the next board meeting, so we can create some of those crosswalks that have been asked for. including separating it by whether a clinician needs to give it or someone else. So we can move these things through and then get some of that information between now and the full board meeting.
So let me just make sure I understand. We could pass these along, let LEAs use the ones that need to get started on them, but then revisit later? Or would that be bad to approve things that then we rip it out from the sheets?
Yeah, so we're not approving them. We're just moving it to the next level to the full board for consideration.
Okay.
As a committee, we can't do the full approval now anyway.
Right. Okay.
But we're moving it forward so that it has that month in between. Yes.
Okay. 4 hours of sleep isn't working for me. Okay. So let's see. I believe it's Board Member Hanson. Your hand is up.
Thanks. I understand the urgency to try to move something forward. If we want to do that today, I would be comfortable with just moving through this line by line and pulling out the ones that we think should be pulled out, the ones with no evidence-based foundation, and the ones where the limitations are such that we don't think that's applicable for schools. Some of them say that they need to have parental reporting for the data. I don't know that we're having parents involved in this screening process at all, or having a report from parents. So if we can just go line by line and take out the ones right now that we obviously don't want, then I'm comfortable with coming back to it later. But I don't want a school to go out and buy one of these programs that says no evidence-based and then have us pull the rug out from under them next year.
Yes, very good. So I'm wondering, so we actually do have a motion on the table. Can we, which was your motion, can we just scrap that and then kind of go line by line, or do that instead? Scott, would you be okay with that?
That's fine. I'll withdraw my motion.
Okay, let me get to Board Member Earl, and then maybe we can quickly do that work because we've got 7 minutes.
Well, as we do that, I do want to pull out, some of these are for clinical use. So I just think those need to be on a different section. That doesn't mean that they're not used in the school, but I don't think, is there a way just to move them at a certain point in the document where these are clinical use items and the others are maybe screener items? That makes sense. It talks to who's using it.
That makes sense too. And then I think going to Patty's point, I think she was also saying this, we can also get as much work done as we can here in our last few minutes. But if we move it to the full board, we would have another chance there to pull some things out after maybe some more study, after an updated list. So keep that in mind too. That might be a place to do some of that just because of the time constraints we have with this. Does that make sense?
And to interject, staff can do that work and have it ready for and send it out to this committee and the full board in between. Does that make sense?
So, yes, thank you. So that we could do some of the work there. So we get it done when it needs to, but then we also make people feel comfortable and we make sure that we have the things we want and that we feel good about. So that's a thought too, committee. Tell me your thoughts. Do you want to start going through and taking off like the evidence-based ones like numbers 25, 26, 30? Do we want to add to them, or do we just want to pass it on to the full board and then we will do the work quickly there?
I would prefer to go through line by line before we pass anything to the board.
Let's do it. So Scott, I'm gonna have you kind of lead the charge on that one, if that's okay, and kind of say, we're going to move these to the full board, but we're going to take out the following. So let's kind of we'll go through them and then we say yes or no, and we'll get through as many as we can. Can we agree to say that motion would automatically include numbers 25, 26, and 30, because we've already talked about those as not being evidence-based?
Sure.
Okay. All right. Scott, will you kind of work us through that? Let's start with number 1.
Are you looking to me, Jenny, to walk us through?
If that's okay. I mean, I can do it too, but I just thought.
No, that's fine. So, and we can just look at page 1 and see, are there everything has evidence-based? Are any of these limitations here ones that would prevent us from recommending this for school use?
Yeah, that's a good idea. If anybody sees an issue on page 1, raise your hand and we'll just pull it off. I think Board Member Earl, you have your hand up on that one.
Sorry, I still have.
Okay.
Okay. So page 2 then. I think Jenny's suggestion to separate the ones for clinical use is probably a good one, and we can do that. Is there anything, this one at the bottom, are those limitations for million adolescent? Is that something that should disqualify this, staff?
No, it's nothing that should disqualify this. It's just there for your information.
Okay.
Okay. Page 3 then.
Okay, sorry, you're going by pages. You're not going by items. Is that right?
Yeah, just because we have 3 minutes left.
Okay, well,
I don't have any.
Yeah.
Number 3 on the on number three item, so it would be the behavior assessment system for children. When I read through this, it has to be performed by a specific person, a trained graduate in certain areas. This wasn't something that just was a teacher survey thing. So I don't know if there's others there that, because I only got out through 5 of these before we got.
Okay, well, we'll do as many as we can. So far, we have 3, 25, 26, and 30. So let's just keep going.
Okay, we're on page 3 then.
Yep.
And we've pulled, I don't have line items on mine, Burns depression and Burns anxiety. We pulled both of those. And we pulled.
I don't know what number they are either. I was just trusting those were 25, 26, and 30.
That is correct.
Okay, thanks.
Vanderbilt has some fairly significant limitations, at least from my untrained eye. Is that one that should be pulled?
And then it says clinically scored. What number is that, staff?
27.
Okay, good. That fits right in line.
Okay, so pull that one.
Okay, we'll do 1 more minute and then we've got to make a motion.
Okay. What about the ones that say rely on parent guardian report? For example, the teacher report form. Can we do that in schools? Is that?
It might make it simpler not to, just because then it's like, yeah, I don't know.
So I'm asking staff, there's 2 of those, teacher report form on page 3, child behavior checklist. It says rely on parent guardian report.
Certainly.
A survey, yeah.
Yes, it's just requiring the parents to fill out a survey according to their student.
So what numbers are those?
That is 28.
Okay.
Are those okay? Do we do that in the schools with the parent surveys or no?
Quite often.
Board Member Gavitt, if I may.
Yes, please.
Some of those are being conducted, and with the parent prior consent to having their student participating in this, they would need to understand that that is the screener being used. And so therefore, by signing and opting in, they would also be signing to participate in that screening.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so let's just pull the ones then that we talked about. I don't know which line items those were. I'll make the motion that we pull those and that we separate the clinical, the ones to be used for by clinicians only, and then pass this on to the board.
Okay, so staff, make sure I have the right ones, and Board Member Hanson, make sure I say the motion correctly. So the motion is that the board approve the list of mental health conditions except for numbers 3, 25, 26, 27, and 30 that LEAs may use as an approved screening tool to screen for is developed collaboratively through USBE and DSAMH for schools to use as part of the school management screening program described in House Bill 323. Is there any discussion to that motion? Okay, all those in favor, or go ahead and vote now.
I'm sorry, we need to have who it's administered by. Who administers this test? Is it teacher? Is it our screening?
Like you want that information that staff sends it to us?
No, so we'll separate.
I want it part of this.
Clinical.
Yeah.
Oh.
And administration. Who administers it?
Okay, so you want to add that to the motion and also know who is to administer each test?
Yes.
Okay.
No objection.
Okay, no objection. Good, perfect. Okay, now go ahead and vote. Okay, so that motion carries with the exception of Board Member Earl voted no. I am so sorry about the rushed, but I thank you, staff. I trust you will be getting that to us in the interim between now and our next board meeting so that we can do more work in the full board meeting if we need to.
Board Gravitt, this is Jeff. I wanted to double check that we are also approving the conditions list. There are two separate lists you need to approve.
Right. Let's see. I read that, but I read it so fast. Are people still okay with their votes? So yeah, let me restate it just to make sure everyone's okay with what they voted for. So the committee approved the list of mental health conditions that LEAs may use as an approved screening tool to screen for as developed collaboratively through USBE and DSAMH for schools to use as a part of the school mental health screening program as described in House Bill 323-2020 and R277625, excluding tools 3, 25, 26, 27, and 30. That's a little confusing because it doesn't really separate the conditions.
Agreed.
Yeah. So that motion, it's almost like we approve the mental health conditions and we approve the screening tools. So pretend I said and I changed that on the recommended action. Are people okay with that? Thank you, Jeff.
I'm good.
I'm good.
Okay. So Nora Lee, are you good?
I am.
Oh, bless your hearts for everybody dealing with all of us. So with that, you guys, thank you for all of your discussion and hard work. I so appreciate you. And staff, thank you for all your hard work as well. And then we will continue working on this, hopefully in board meeting, but we'll do our homework beforehand. Anybody need to say anything before we depart and let the next committee to take over?
You guys
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Jenny. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks. Have a good weekend.
You too, staff. Thank you guys so much. Bye.
Bye.